My name is Charmaine, and at 35 years old, I watched my father adjust his custom silk tie, look me dead in the eyes, and tell me to eat the table scraps while he took the rest of the family out to a five-star steakhouse. I did not cry. I just looked at his tailored suit, the diamond watch on his wrist, and the keys to my brother-in-law's Porsche resting on the granite counter. I simply smiled and said, "Okay." What none of them realized as they walked out the door, laughing at my expense, was that my name and my bank account were the only things keeping them from total financial ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who used your generosity while entirely underestimating your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant projecting an image of absolute perfection to the outside world. To the community, my family was the pinnacle of Black excellence. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and eventually became a highly successful lead software developer for a top financial tech firm. Yet in the eyes of my parents, I was just the quiet, boring daughter who never cared about designer labels or country club gossip. The real tension reached its boiling point last Friday evening. My father, Calvin, had just been named vice president of a mid-sized investment firm. It was a title he had chased for a decade mostly to feed his own massive ego. To celebrate, he decided to take the real family out for an extravagant dinner at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. The air in the foyer was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and hairspray as everyone gathered by the front door. I was standing near the kitchen island, wearing a comfortable oversized sweater and my favorite leggings. I had just spent the last 3 weeks practically living at this house to nurse my mother Brenda through her knee replacement recovery while working remotely. I cooked the meals, I managed her medication, and I kept the house running while my sister Chloe and her husband Jamal were too busy attending social galas to even call. Calvin stood by the hallway mirror admiring his reflection. He smoothed down the lapels of his midnight blue suit. It was a bespoke piece that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Beside him, Brenda was draped in a velvet evening gown, her freshly styled hair perfectly framing her face. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and mild annoyance. "Are you really going to stand there looking like that?" Brenda asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "You could have at least put on some makeup, Charmaine. Your father is celebrating the most important night of his career, and you look like you are about to clean out the garage." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I am not going anywhere," I replied calmly. "Nobody told me to get dressed." Chloe, my younger sister by 7 years, let out a sharp theatrical laugh. She was wearing a red designer dress that hugged her perfectly, and she was busy adjusting a glittering diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. "Oh, come on, Charmaine," Chloe said, rolling her eyes. "You know you would absolutely hate it at a place like Ruth's Chris anyway. It is fine dining. They do not serve takeout in cardboard boxes. Plus, Dad invited some of his new corporate board members tonight. We need to project a certain image. You being there in your little sweatpants talking about computer code would just kill the vibe completely." Her husband Jamal leaned against the heavy oak front door, spinning the keys to his white Porsche around his index finger. Jamal liked to call himself a cryptocurrency entrepreneur, but in reality he spent most of his time losing money on risky trades and bragging about his non-existent wealth on social media. He smirked at me, showing off his perfectly whitened teeth. "Leave the tech nerd alone, Chloe," Jamal sneered. "Somebody has to stay behind and make sure nobody breaks in to steal all our nice things. Besides, her kind of salary does not cover a $200 steak anyway." My father finally turned away from the mirror. He looked at me up and down and sighed deeply, as if my very existence was a heavy burden he was forced to carry. He walked over to the kitchen island, where the remains of a cheap rotisserie chicken sat on a plastic cutting board. He tapped his perfectly manicured finger against the counter. "Do not forget to finish the leftovers on the table, Charmaine," he said, his voice completely devoid of any warmth or affection. "It would be a shame to waste good food. We will probably be out late celebrating my success. Lock the doors and turn off the lights. Electricity is not free, you know." I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had always treated me like an unwanted guest in my own life. I looked at my mother, who was already turning her back on me to check her lipstick in the reflection of her phone screen. I looked at my sister and her arrogant husband, who were giggling as if my father had just delivered the funniest punchline in the world. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an explanation. I did not throw a tantrum or cry about how unfair it was that I had spent the last 3 weeks serving them only to be treated like the hired help. I just looked at my father and said, okay. The heavy front door closed behind them with a loud, solid thud. The sudden silence in the large house was deafening. I walked over to the large bay window in the living room and pulled back the sheer curtain just enough to watch them leave. Jamal pressed the button on his key fob, and the headlights of the Porsche flashed brightly in the driveway. My parents climbed into the back of a luxury black SUV they had hired for the evening. They looked like royalty waving to their imaginary subjects. They drove off down the tree-lined street, leaving me entirely alone. I let the curtain fall back into place. A cold, terrifying calm washed over me. The kind of calm that only comes when you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose and nothing left to protect. I turned away from the window and walked up the grand curved staircase. I bypassed my childhood bedroom, the one my mother had painted pale blue against my wishes to force me into her mold of a delicate, obedient daughter. Instead, I walked straight into my father's home office. The room was a monument to Calvin's vanity. The walls were lined with framed certificates, photographs of him shaking hands with local politicians, and shelves filled with leather-bound books he had never bothered to read. I walked over to the large mahogany painting hanging behind his heavy oak desk. I pushed the frame aside, revealing the digital keypad of the wall safe. Calvin thought he was a genius for hiding it there. He also thought he was a genius for using his own birth year and my mother's birth year as the passcode. I punched in the numbers. The heavy metal door clicked open. I did not reach for the emergency cash. I did not care about the expensive watches or the velvet boxes of jewelry. I reached past all of those things and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope tucked all the way in the back. I carried it over to the desk, turned on the brass reading lamp, and emptied the contents onto the polished wood surface. For the past 5 years, my family had lived a life of absolute luxury. They drove luxury cars, they wore designer clothes, and they threw extravagant parties to impress people they secretly despised. They believed they were untouchable. They believed they were better than everyone else, especially me. But as I stared at the documents spread across the desk, the glorious illusion shattered into a million pieces. 5 years ago, Calvin's previous business venture had completely collapsed. He had leveraged everything, the house, his retirement accounts, and his savings to fund a disastrous commercial real estate deal. When the market shifted, he lost it all. He filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to avoid total ruin. His credit score plummeted to the low 400s. He was a financial ghost. He could not even get approved for a basic department store credit card, let alone a mortgage on a sprawling colonial estate in Fairfield, Connecticut. That was when he had come crying to me, the quiet, boring daughter who worked in software development. The daughter who had quietly amassed a small fortune through smart investments and stock options from my tech company. I had agreed to help him because despite everything, he was still my father. I paid off the immediate debts. I bought this very house under a holding company that I completely controlled and allowed them to live here rent-free so they would not lose face in the community. I added Calvin and Brenda as authorized users on my exclusive American Express Black Card, with the strict understanding that they would only use it for emergencies. But an emergency to Calvin meant a bespoke Tom Ford suit. An emergency to Brenda meant a velvet evening gown. An emergency to Chloe and Jamal meant me co-signing the lease on a shiny new Porsche because neither of them had the income history to secure the loan on their own. For 5 years, I paid the bills. I funded the illusion. I kept the lights on in the fortress of expectations. I told myself it was fine because I could easily afford it. I told myself that eventually they would appreciate me. Eventually they would see my value. But standing there in the quiet house looking at the leftovers of a cheap chicken on the kitchen counter, I realized the brutal truth. They did not love me. They did not even respect me. They saw me as nothing more than a silent, bottomless, ATM machine. A machine that was not stylish enough to sit at their dinner table, but was useful enough to pay for the meal. I picked up the black metal credit card sitting in my wallet. It caught the light of the brass desk lamp. It felt incredibly heavy in my hand. They wanted to treat me like a stranger. They wanted to cast me aside to protect their pristine image in front of corporate strangers. They wanted me to eat their scraps. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a software developer who had just located the fatal bug in a system and was preparing to hit delete. I pulled my laptop from my bag, opened it on Calvin's desk, and logged directly into my primary banking portal. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I navigated to the Account Management tab. I found the section listing the authorized users on my account: Calvin, Brenda, Chloe, Jamal. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I moved the cursor and clicked the button to instantly disable and permanently cancel every single card linked to my name. I watched the status bars change from active to terminated. I then pulled up the auto-pay settings for the utility bills, the cable, the insurance, and the country club memberships. I canceled them all. I was done being the silent financial ghost haunting this house. If they wanted to live like royalty, they were going to have to figure out how to pay for the crown. I closed the laptop, plunging the room back into darkness, and walked out of the office. The real celebration was just about to begin. I walked down the dark hallway, the thick Persian carpet muffling my footsteps. Clicking a few buttons on a website was a good start, but it was not enough. My family was incredibly cunning, especially when it came to maintaining their lavish lifestyle. If a card declined at the steakhouse, Calvin would not just accept it. He would immediately step outside, call the bank, and try to sweet-talk or bully a customer service representative into overriding the block by claiming it was a simple technical error. He had done it before when he maxed out his own limits years ago. I needed to build an iron wall that his arrogance could not penetrate. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the private 24/7 concierge number reserved exclusively for top-tier account holders. This was not a standard customer service line. This was the direct channel for clients who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. A polished, professional voice answered almost immediately. "Good evening, Ms. Barnes. How may I assist you tonight?" I kept my voice perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. "I need to report a total and permanent compromise of my account. I want an absolute hard fraud lock placed on every secondary card associated with my profile. That includes the cards issued to Calvin, Brenda, Chloe, and Jamal. I want those accounts permanently revoked, not just suspended." The concierge typed rapidly on his end. "I understand, Ms. Barnes. I see you initiated the preliminary cancellations via the online portal a few moments ago. I will now apply a Level 1 security protocol lock. If any of these individuals attempt to run the physical cards they currently hold, the transaction will not only decline, but the system will instruct the merchant to confiscate the card immediately. Will you require replacement cards issued for these secondary users?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "Do not issue any new cards under any circumstances. Furthermore, I want a strict verbal password required for any future phone inquiries regarding this account. Set the security passcode to leftovers. If anyone calls claiming to be me or attempting to authorize a charge and they do not provide that exact word, hang up on them immediately." The concierge confirmed the new security measures. "It is done, Ms. Barnes." The financial free ride was officially over. "Thank you for your swift assistance," I said before ending the call and tossing the phone onto my bed. The silence of the house felt completely different now. It was no longer a heavy, suffocating silence where I felt trapped by their endless demands. It felt like the deep intake of breath right before a massive hurricane makes landfall. Next on my list of destruction was my arrogant brother-in-law. Jamal loved to parade around town in his pristine white Porsche Panamera, calling himself a self-made cryptocurrency mogul. He posted daily motivational videos telling young men to grind harder and invest smarter. What his thousands of gullible followers did not know was that his entire existence was fully subsidized by his quiet, boring sister-in-law. 6 months ago, my mother Brenda had cornered me in the kitchen, tearfully begging me to co-sign the lease and act as the primary financial guarantor for that exact car. She claimed Jamal was on the very verge of a massive technological breakthrough and just needed to project the right image of success to secure high-level investors. She threatened to completely cut me out of the upcoming family holidays if I did not support Black entrepreneurship within our own family. Like a guilt-tripped fool, I eventually gave in just to buy some peace. But tonight the truth was finally coming to collect its due. I looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was approaching 10 at night, but the auto finance company's emergency asset recovery department operated around the clock to handle high-risk defaults. I dialed the toll-free number and navigated through the automated prompts until a tired-sounding recovery agent picked up the line. I need to voluntarily surrender a vehicle and legally remove myself as the financial guarantor, I stated clearly. I provided the long account number from my digital files. The agent typed quietly for a moment, then pulled up the file. He let out a low, surprised whistle through his teeth. Ah, yes, the white Porsche Panamera. Honestly, ma'am, it is about time somebody called us about this account. The secondary party on this lease, Jamal, has not made a single valid payment in over 6 months. He sent us 2 checks that bounced due to insufficient funds, and since then, it has been total radio silence. We have been sending default notices and final warnings to the primary address on file, but they keep getting ignored. I leaned against the heavy wooden door frame, a cold, sharp smile spreading across my face. Jamal had clearly been intercepting the mail to hide his complete financial failure from Chloe and my parents. He was playing the role of a wealthy tech genius while drowning in debt he had no intention of paying. I am no longer financially responsible for this depreciating asset, I told the agent, my voice steady and firm. The vehicle is currently parked in the open driveway at the primary address listed on the account. The physical keys are not available because he took them to dinner, but the car is completely accessible from the street. There are no gates blocking it. I authorize immediate repossession of the vehicle. Send the tow truck tonight. The agent sounded genuinely relieved to have an easy recovery. We will dispatch a local repo team to your location within the next few hours, ma'am. They usually operate between midnight and dawn. Once the vehicle is physically secured on our lot, your liability will be formally severed. I hung up the phone. Jamal wanted to mock my comfortable sweater and belittle my corporate salary while spinning the keys to a luxury car he literally did not own. By tomorrow morning, the self-proclaimed crypto king would be walking to the bus stop. With the financial arteries officially severed, it was time to physically erase myself from their toxic world. I walked into the downstairs guest room that had served as my temporary prison for the last 3 weeks, while I played nurse to my ungrateful mother. I did not have much here. I had only planned to stay until she could walk without assistance. I pulled my sleek black luxury suitcase from the closet and began meticulously folding my clothes. I packed my comfortable oversized sweaters, my leggings, my laptop chargers, and the few basic toiletries I had brought from my real home. I worked with military precision. I left absolutely nothing behind. I wiped down the bathroom counter, checked the drawers, and smoothed out the bed sheets. I wanted it to look as though I had never existed in this space at all. I wanted to leave a complete void. Once my suitcase was securely zipped, I grabbed my heavy laptop bag and walked downstairs to the main digital control panel mounted on the living room wall. I had paid top dollar for this state-of-the-art smart home security system when I bought the property. It controlled the electronic locks, the exterior cameras, the interior thermostat, the garage doors, and even the landscape lighting. My father loved to brag about it to his golf buddies, acting as if he had designed and installed the complex network himself to keep his family safe. I tapped the glowing touchscreen, waking up the system, and entered my master administrator credentials. The main dashboard loaded instantly. First, I accessed the biometric security settings. I carefully highlighted and deleted Calvin, Brenda, Chloe, and Jamal from the authorized fingerprint access list. Their biometrics would no longer trigger the heavy front door to unlock. Next, I navigated to the keypad settings and changed the master PIN code to a completely random alphanumeric string that only I knew. I then opened the mobile integration tab and permanently disabled the remote access application on all of their smartphones. They were now completely locked out of the system's digital brain. Because my parents relied so heavily on the convenience of the smart locks, they almost never carried their physical house keys anymore. If they came home tonight without a key, they would be spending the night sleeping on the decorative porch furniture. But I was not finished. I wanted them to feel the chill of my absence. I lowered the central heating, dropping the house temperature down to a crisp 60 degrees. Then I accessed the home's high-speed internet router settings. I executed a hard factory reset, wiping out the entire network configuration. I changed the Wi-Fi network name from Calvin's Castle to Access Denied and set a new complex password. There would be no more streaming high-definition movies, no more scrolling through social media, and no more posting fake luxury lifestyle photos on the internet using the high-speed connection that my tech salary paid for. I stood alone in the center of the grand foyer, gripping the sturdy handle of my suitcase. I took one last long look at the pristine crystal chandelier hanging brilliantly above me and the expensive imported Persian rug spread out beneath my feet. This massive house was nothing more than a beautifully decorated lie, a hollow stage set for a family of actors who had completely forgotten who was funding the production. And I was finally walking away from the theater. I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air and pulled the heavy oak front door shut behind me. The electronic deadbolt automatically engaged with a loud, satisfying metallic click. The fortress was sealed tight. I walked across the manicured driveway to my modest, reliable sedan. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. I drove away from the house, pulling out of the affluent suburban neighborhood without ever looking back in the rearview mirror. My real life was waiting for me. The drive from Fairfield to the downtown district took exactly 45 minutes, but with every mile marker I passed, I felt another heavy, rusted chain fall away from my chest. The sprawling suburban lawns and imposing colonial facades slowly gave way to the sleek, towering glass and steel structures of the city skyline. This was my actual world, a world built on pure logic, relentless hard work, and undeniable reality. I pulled my reliable sedan into the private underground parking garage of my high-rise building. I could have easily afforded a fleet of imported luxury cars to rival Jamal's rented toys, but I preferred the reliability and the complete anonymity of my modest vehicle. I parked in my reserved VIP spot, swiped my encrypted access badge across the security scanner, and stepped into the private high-speed elevator that opened directly into my home. When the polished steel doors silently parted, I stepped into the sprawling downtown penthouse that I had purchased entirely in cash 2 years ago. The space was magnificent, but more importantly, it was completely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the glittering city below. The interior was minimalist and modern, designed with clean, sharp lines and neutral tones that brought me absolute peace. There were no fake mahogany desks, no cheap framed certificates of vanity, and no velvet evening gowns draped over the backs of dining chairs. Every single piece of furniture, every original piece of art on the walls, and every square inch of hardwood floor in this penthouse was paid for by my own intellectual labor. I left my black suitcase by the front door and walked over to the massive glass window, pressing my palm against the cool pane. For the last 3 weeks, I had traded this quiet, beautiful sanctuary for the stifling, toxic air of my parents' house. I had only gone back there because Brenda had undergone a minor knee replacement surgery. Chloe, despite living entirely on my dime and having no actual job, had claimed she was far too busy with her vital social calendar and her daily spa treatments to play nurse to our mother. Jamal had simply laughed when I asked him to help carry the heavy medical supplies, stating that his cryptocurrency empire required his constant, undivided attention. So I had packed a small bag, driven out to the suburbs, and taken on the exhausting role of the dutiful daughter. I cooked their specific meals, I managed Brenda's strict medication schedule, I drove her to physical therapy appointments, and I kept their massive house absolutely spotless. I did all of this while working my highly demanding full-time job, remotely managing complex databases and leading a team of developers. And my reward for this immense sacrifice was being told to eat cold rotisserie chicken leftovers while they dressed in designer clothes I paid for to celebrate a corporate promotion my father did not even deserve. I shook my head, letting out a quiet, dry laugh that echoed softly in the empty penthouse. The utter absurdity of it all was finally crystal clear. I had been setting myself on fire for years just to keep them warm, but the fire was officially out and I was taking my warmth back. I walked into my expansive master suite, stripped off my clothes, and stepped into the walk-in rainfall shower. The scalding hot water rushed over my shoulders, washing away the lingering smell of Calvin's expensive heavy cologne and the suffocating tension of the Fairfield house. I slept that night like I had not slept in half a decade. There was no anxiety keeping me awake staring at the ceiling. There was no underlying dread of what massive financial disaster Calvin would inevitably drag me into next. There was only the deep restorative silence of a life finally reclaimed. When I woke up the next morning, the early sunlight was streaming through the sheer curtains, casting a warm golden glow across the Brazilian hardwood floors. I stretched my arms above my head, feeling a profound sense of physical lightness in my bones. I threw on a silk robe and padded barefoot into my state-of-the-art kitchen. I took my time going through my morning routine, moving with a deliberate calm. I ground fresh imported Ethiopian coffee beans, the rich earthy aroma instantly filling the kitchen and erasing any remaining memories of the suburbs. I carefully heated the water to the precise temperature and prepared a manual pour over coffee, watching the dark liquid slowly drip into my favorite handmade ceramic mug. I carried my steaming coffee out to the expansive private terrace and sat in a plush outdoor lounge chair, letting the cool, crisp morning breeze brush against my face. The city below was just waking up. Traffic was moving steadily along the avenues, and the distant hum of urban life felt like a comforting, familiar symphony. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the complex, bold flavors. I felt completely at peace. I was 35 years old, highly successful, financially independent, and for the first absolute time in my adult life, I was entirely free of my family's parasitic grip. I sat on the terrace for nearly an hour, simply enjoying the solitude and the brilliant sunrise. I mentally reviewed my upcoming week at the financial tech firm. We were in the middle of a massive corporate acquisition audit, and as the lead software developer handling the highly sensitive data integration, my days were incredibly busy. I needed a clear head to analyze the intricate financial systems of the companies we were evaluating. But for the first time in years, I felt entirely focused. My mental energy was no longer being drained by Chloe's manufactured high school dramas or Jamal's impending legal and financial crises. My mind was my own again. I eventually went back inside, set my empty ceramic mug on the marble kitchen island, and finally picked up my smartphone. I had kept it on silent mode since the moment I initiated the security protocol last night. I tapped the screen to wake it up, and the display instantly illuminated the dark kitchen counter. It was exactly 8:30 in the morning. The screen was completely cluttered with a barrage of notifications. A massive digital avalanche had occurred while I was peacefully sleeping in my own bed. The first domino had not just fallen, it had smashed violently through the floorboards. I bypassed the text messages and opened my primary banking application to review the detailed activity log. The strict security protocol I had established with the concierge the night before had worked flawlessly, like a perfectly written block of code. At 10:15 last night, there was a glaring red notification. A decline charge of $2,540 at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse attempted on Calvin's secondary card. A second frantic attempt was made exactly 1 minute later, declined. A third desperate attempt, declined. The banking system had then formally flagged the physical card and issued a direct command for immediate confiscation by the merchant. I could only imagine the sheer absolute horror on Calvin's smug face when the waiter returned to the table holding his severed plastic lifeline, informing him in front of his brand new corporate bosses that his exclusive card was dead. But the chaos did not stop there. The financial bleeding had steadily continued into the early morning hours. At 8:15, there was another cluster of bright red notifications at the top of my screen. Chloe and Jamal had apparently tried to soothe the previous night's public humiliation by treating themselves to an extravagant morning meal to keep up their appearances. The banking app showed a declined transaction of $420 at Le Petit Jardin, an exclusive luxury brunch spot in the city, known for its ridiculously overpriced mimosas and caviar-topped omelets. Attempted on Chloe's card, declined. Attempted on Jamal's card. Declined. The confiscation protocol was automatically activated for both of their cards as well. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the high modern ceilings of my kitchen. They were currently sitting at a table surrounded by elite society, with a massive breakfast bill sitting on a silver platter, and absolutely no viable way to pay for it. The digital illusion of their wealth had officially evaporated, leaving them completely exposed in the harsh, unforgiving light of day. They could not pretend their way out of a restaurant bill. Right on cue, the phone in my hand began to vibrate violently, buzzing angrily against my palm. The screen flashed rapidly with an incoming call from Calvin. He had already called 12 times over the course of the night and morning, leaving a string of increasingly frantic and aggressive voicemails. Below his name, the notification center showed 16 missed text messages from Brenda, demanding that I answer my phone immediately and fix whatever technical glitch was ruining their lives. Chloe had sent a relentless barrage of messages filled with angry red emojis, exclamation points, and demands for an explanation. I did not answer the incoming call. I simply stood in the center of my beautiful, pristine kitchen, watching my father's name flash across the high-definition screen. He was no longer the arrogant, untouchable man in the bespoke suit commanding me to eat scraps in the corner of his house. He was a desperate, terrified man watching his carefully constructed house of cards collapse violently around him. I let the phone vibrate and ring until it finally went to voicemail. I needed to finish getting dressed for work. The real devastating consequences of their actions were just beginning to unfold, and I was perfectly content to let them sit in their panic a little while longer before I delivered the final absolute blow. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and began selecting my outfit for the day. I bypassed the casual, comfortable tech sweaters I usually wore to the office, and instead reached for a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit made of high-end Italian wool. It was a suit designed specifically for a corporate boardroom, not a hidden cubicle. Today was not a day for blending quietly into the background like an obedient servant. Today was a day for projecting absolute, undeniable authority. I pulled a crisp, white silk blouse from its heavy wooden hanger and began methodically buttoning it up. The luxury fabric felt cool and deeply empowering against my skin, a tangible reminder of everything I had built for myself. As I adjusted the sharp collar in the full-length mirror, my smartphone began to ring again. The custom jarring ringtone I had assigned to my father cut sharply through the quiet elegance of my master bedroom. He was absolutely relentless. I walked out of the closet and looked down at the glowing screen resting on the nightstand. It was his 15th consecutive attempt to reach me since the sun came up. I decided he had marinated in his own toxic panic long enough. I walked over, picked up the sleek device, and tapped the green accept button. I did not say hello. I did not offer any morning greetings. I simply put the phone on speaker mode, set it face up on the smooth glass surface of my makeup vanity, and sat down to begin applying my cosmetics. Charmaine! Calvin's voice exploded through the tiny digital speaker with the violent force of a detonating bomb. His words were slightly slurred, thick with a chaotic mixture of pure, unadulterated rage and the lingering effects of whatever expensive scotch he had consumed the night before. What in the absolute hell is wrong with your phone? What did you do to the banking accounts? You need to call the executive concierge right this second and authorize my cards. Do you hear me speaking to you? Call them right now and fix this massive mistake. I carefully uncapped my black liquid eyeliner, keeping my hand perfectly steady. I did not do anything to your accounts, Calvin. I replied, my voice remaining as smooth and cold as the marble countertop beneath my fingers. I simply restricted unauthorized access to my own hard-earned money. If your personal credit cards are not working properly, I highly suggest you call your own bank to resolve the issue. Do not play these arrogant games with me, Charmaine, he screamed, the pitch of his voice cracking desperately. Do you have any idea what you just did to my life? Do you have any earthly idea what kind of sheer humiliation I went through last night because of your little temper tantrum? I traced a perfect, precise dark line along my upper eyelid. No. But I am entirely sure you are going to tell me all about it. For the next several minutes, I sat quietly and listened as Calvin involuntarily painted a vivid, pathetic picture of his own spectacular social downfall. Through his furious, erratic shouting, I could clearly see the lavish scene at Ruth's Chris Steakhouse unfolding exactly as I had predicted it would. He described the heavy, dark mahogany tables, the low, flattering ambient lighting, and the endless clinking of fine crystal wine glasses. Calvin had been proudly holding court at the absolute center of the private dining room, surrounded by Brenda Chloe Jamal and three elite senior executives from his new corporate parent company, including the chief executive officer himself. Calvin had aggressively ordered the most ridiculously expensive items on the menu just to show off. He loudly bragged to me about ordering the massive dry-aged tomahawk steaks, the imported shaved truffles, the grand towering seafood platters, and three different $300 bottles of vintage Cabernet. He desperately wanted to show the wealthy CEO that he was a man of immense independent wealth and highly sophisticated taste. He wanted to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he belonged in their exclusive corporate inner circle. When the heavy leather-bound checkbook finally arrived at the end of the long evening holding a massive, staggering bill of $2,540, Calvin had confidently placed the heavy black metallic credit card on the silver serving tray without even bothering to glance at the total amount. Then came the swift, devastating humiliation. According to Calvin's increasingly hysterical recounting, the general manager of the upscale restaurant had personally walked over to their table holding the silver tray. The manager had leaned down close to Calvin's ear and quietly informed him that the exclusive card was not just casually declined for insufficient funds, but actively flagged for immediate permanent confiscation by the issuing bank. The manager, acting under the strict security protocols I had initiated, had then physically snapped the heavy metal card in half right there in the dining room directly in front of the CEO and the other confused executives. "Do you know how incredibly broke and pathetic that made me look?" Calvin roared through the phone, his breathing now heavy and wildly erratic. The CEO of the massive parent company that just acquired my entire firm was sitting right across the table from me. He was staring right at me. The waiter cut the card in half, Charmaine, right in half. They treated me like some common street criminal trying to run a cheap credit scam in a fine dining establishment. I had to sit there sweating through my custom suit and laugh it off like it was some ridiculous administrative banking error. I tried to give the manager the other cards to run, but Chloe and Brenda's cards were completely dead too. Nothing worked. I picked up a soft makeup brush and began evenly blending my foundation across my cheekbones. "And how did you end up paying the bill, Calvin?" There was a long, agonizing dead pause on the phone line. When he finally spoke, his voice shook violently with deep-seated, inescapable mortification. "I had to ask Richard, the vice president of regional sales, to cover the entire tab. I had to sit there looking like a fool and beg a corporate colleague I barely even know to pay for my family's extravagant dinner." Richard looked at me like I was a complete, absolute joke. He actually pitied me. The CEO did not say a single word to me for the rest of the agonizing night. "You completely humiliated me in front of the most important wealthy people in my entire industry. You ruined my professional reputation before I even officially started the job. You ruined your own professional reputation by pretending to be a multimillionaire living on a software developer's salary," I stated, plainly checking my reflection. "I am not financially responsible for maintaining your pathetic vanity." Before Calvin could launch into another blistering screaming fit, I heard the muffled sounds of a physical struggle taking place over the phone. Brenda was aggressively wrestling the device away from his hands. The line fumbled loudly, and then my mother's sharp, desperate voice filled my quiet bedroom. "Charmaine, you listen to me right now," Brenda demanded. Her tone was a deeply toxic mixture of supreme maternal authority and sheer underlying panic. "What you are doing to us today is fundamentally evil. You are actively destroying your own blood family over some petty, childish jealousy." I paused my makeup application and looked directly at the phone. Jealousy? What exactly am I jealous of, Brenda? "The undeniable fact that you are all completely broke." "You listen to me right now," Brenda snapped, her voice dropping heavily into that familiar scolding, terrifying register she had used to terrorize me throughout my entire childhood. "Black families need to stick together. We have to violently protect each other in this harsh world. Your father just got the corporate promotion of a lifetime. He is desperately trying to establish a lasting legacy for all of us. Do you have any idea how incredibly hard it is for a black man to reach the senior executive level in white corporate America? He has to constantly project massive success. He has to flawlessly look the part every single day. And you are deliberately embarrassing your own father in front of these wealthy white executives. You are making us all look like uneducated fools. You are freely giving them a reason to doubt his competence. The sheer profound audacity of her twisted logic was breathtaking. Brenda had spent her entire adult life weaponizing race, family loyalty, and deep religious guilt to relentlessly manipulate everyone around her. She truly fundamentally believed that my hard-earned money belonged to the collective family image, and that I was simply a walking silent bank vault, required to endlessly fund their aggressive social climbing. So let me make sure I get this straight, I said, leaning much closer to the phone speaker. Your personal definition of Black excellence is committing ongoing financial fraud against your own daughter. Your grand idea of a family legacy is forcing me to pay off a $2,000 luxury steak dinner while you all sit around a beautiful table laughing at my expense. You want to lecture me about how hard it is to succeed in corporate America? I know exactly how hard it is. Because unlike Calvin, I actually earned my leadership position. I did not fake my way into a luxury penthouse. I worked grueling 80-hour weeks solving complex problems while you and Chloe were getting expensive chemical peels and going to fancy country club luncheons entirely on my dime. You are being incredibly selfish, Brenda cried out desperately, trying to regain control of the slipping narrative. You have way more money than you could ever possibly spend. You do not even care about buying nice things. You walk around looking like a broke college student half the time. We absolutely need this money to maintain our vital social network. Jamal is about to casually secure a massive tech investment. Chloe desperately needs to keep up her online social presence to get brand deals. We are a team, Charmaine. You have to call the bank and unfreeze those accounts right now before they report the defaults to the major credit bureaus. I let out a slow, perfectly steady breath. The heavy guilt trip was simply not working anymore. The invisible strings she had violently pulled for 35 years were finally completely severed. She was desperately playing a familiar song on an instrument that had absolutely no strings left. There is no team, Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly icy register. There are only blood-sucking parasites and a willing host, and the host just permanently died. Charmaine, please. Calvin's voice quickly returned to the background, sounding increasingly frantic and utterly broken. I desperately need that black card active today. I have to casually take the CEO out for a private lunch to smoothly gloss over what happened last night. I need to prove to him it was just a silly misunderstanding. If I show up today with no money, they are going to look deeply into my financial background. They cannot know about the previous bankruptcy, Charmaine. They will immediately pull the executive promotion. Please just turn the card on for one more single week. I will pay you back, I swear to God. You do not have a single legitimate dollar to your name, Calvin, I firmly reminded him. You cannot possibly pay me back. You have not paid for a single solitary thing in 5 long years. You drove away from that massive house last night in a luxury hired SUV, feeling like an absolute king. And what exactly did you tell me before you walked out the door? The phone line went entirely silently dead. Neither Calvin nor Brenda dared to speak a single word. They knew exactly what was coming. I picked up the phone from the vanity holding the cold metal close to my face. I clearly remembered the exact look of pure disgust in his eyes when he pointed his perfectly manicured finger at the kitchen island. I remembered the sickening sound of Jamal laughing and Chloe rolling her eyes at my existence. My money is not for people who tell me to eat leftovers, I said softly. The heavy words tasted like absolute undeniable victory on my tongue. I pressed the glowing red button and permanently ended the call. I immediately went into the phone settings and completely blocked both of their numbers from ever reaching me again. The beautiful silence in the penthouse returned heavy and deeply, profoundly satisfying. I stood up, slipped my arms into my suit jacket, adjusted the sharp collar one last time and picked up my heavy leather briefcase. Let them try to figure out how to buy a luxury lunch today. Let them figure out how to put expensive premium gas in their leased cars. Let them try to hopelessly explain to their elite social circle why their pristine financial facade was suddenly violently crumbling into dust. I had a massive corporate acquisition audit to run, and I absolutely could not be late. I walked out of the apartment and locked the heavy door behind me, completely ready to face a world where I was finally the one holding all the power. I stepped out of the private elevator and walked onto the top floor of my corporate office building. The environment here was the exact opposite of the chaotic, toxic household I had just escaped. The air was cool and crisp, smelling faintly of expensive espresso and fresh linen. My colleagues were moving with quiet, focused efficiency, preparing for the massive merger audit that would consume our week. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms and took my seat in my spacious corner office. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I had a perfect view of the bustling financial district below. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on my pristine desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the highly confidential financial dossier for the parent company that had just acquired my father's firm. I was perfectly centered. I was completely in my element. Then my phone began to buzz violently against the polished mahogany surface of my desk. I glanced down at the glowing screen. It was Chloe. My mother and father had been permanently blocked, but I had intentionally left my sister's number open. I knew the timeline of the auto finance recovery team, and I knew exactly what was happening in the affluent suburban neighborhood of Fairfield right at this very second. I picked up the phone, swiped the green button, and pressed the device to my ear. I did not even get the chance to say a single word before the hysterical screaming began. "Are you completely out of your absolute mind?" Chloe shrieked at the top of her lungs. Her voice was so piercing and frantic that I had to pull the phone a few inches away from my ear. "You need to call these people off right now, Charmaine. I mean it. Tell them it is a massive mistake. Get them off my driveway." Through the digital connection, I could hear a beautiful symphony of absolute chaos unfolding in the background. I heard the loud, heavy clanking of thick steel chains. I heard the distinct, aggressive rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine idling loudly. And most satisfyingly of all, I heard the sharp metallic whine of a hydraulic lift engaging. The local repo men had arrived exactly on schedule. "There is no mistake to fix, Chloe," I replied, my tone as calm and measured as if I were discussing a mundane spreadsheet. "The auto finance company is simply reclaiming their legal property." "They are stealing our car!" Chloe sobbed, her voice cracking with pure panic and profound social humiliation. "There is a massive flatbed tow truck parked diagonally right across our pristine lawn. They are dragging the Porsche out of the garage. Do you have any idea what you are doing to us right now?" The Harrisons are standing on their front porch directly across the street, literally pointing and staring at us. Mrs. Higgins is walking her dog, and she stopped right at the end of our driveway to watch. Everyone in the entire neighborhood is looking at us like we are broke common criminals. "You are completely ruining my life." I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and looked out at the city skyline. "You ruined your own life, Chloe. You and your husband have been driving around in a $120,000 luxury vehicle for 6 months without making a single payment. Did you honestly think a plastic facade would protect you from a legal contract?" "I am an online influencer," Chloe screamed desperately, trying to assert a status that did not actually exist. "My entire brand is built on projecting a luxury lifestyle. If my followers find out my car was repossessed, my brand deals will completely vanish. If you do not call these repo men right now and pay the balance, I swear to God I will go on Instagram Live and expose you. I will tell all my hundreds of thousands of followers that you are a bitter, jealous, miserable sister who is actively trying to destroy my Black-owned business because you are incredibly lonely and hate seeing me succeed. I will absolutely ruin your reputation, Charmaine." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. Her threats were so incredibly hollow they were almost comedic. "Go ahead, Chloe," I challenged her smoothly. "Go on your live stream right now. Tell your followers that your quiet, boring tech sister is a jealous monster. But make sure you also show them the actual receipts. Show them the lease agreement with my name on the primary guarantor line. Show them the bank statements proving that I paid your rent, your luxury car insurance, and your ridiculous Sephora credit card bills for the last 5 years. Let us see how your luxury influencer brand survives when the entire internet realizes you are a 30-year-old woman living entirely off an allowance from your older sister. The line went completely dead quiet for a fraction of a second as the reality of my words hit her. She knew I had the exact documentation to back up every single claim. Before she could formulate another hysterical response, I heard the phone being aggressively snatched from her hands. Listen to me right now, Charmaine. Jamal's voice came through the speaker deep and artificially lowered in a desperate attempt to sound deeply threatening and authoritative. He was deploying his signature alpha male posturing, the exact same tone he used in his ridiculous online cryptocurrency motivational videos. I am listening, Jamal, I said mildly, tapping my pen against the desk. You are going to call this tow company and you are going to tell them this is a clerical error, Jamal ordered, speaking slowly and forcefully, as if he were commanding a disobedient child. I have high-level venture capital investors coming to the house this afternoon for a major business meeting. I need that Porsche sitting in the driveway to project the right image. If they pull up and see an empty driveway, or worse, if they see my car chained to a tow truck, my funding falls through. You are directly messing with my business, and I will not tolerate this level of disrespect from you. I stopped tapping my pen. The absolute audacity of this man standing on a driveway watching a car he did not pay for being dragged away and still trying to command me was truly staggering. What business, Jamal? I asked, my voice dropping into a lethal freezing register. Are you talking about the fake crypto empire that generates absolutely zero revenue? Are you talking about the business where you quietly bounced 2 separate checks to the auto finance company and then spent the next 4 months hiding the default notices from my parents so you could keep pretending to be a self-made millionaire? Jamal stumbled over his words, his fake alpha facade instantly cracking under the weight of undeniable facts. I had a temporary cash flow issue, he stammered defensively. The markets have been incredibly volatile lately. You do not understand how high-level investing works. I just needed a little more time to liquidate some digital assets. You had no legal right to just call them and surrender the car behind my back. Actually, Jamal, I have every legal right in the world, I explained, speaking to him with the clinical precision of an attorney delivering a final verdict. I am the primary financial guarantor on that lease. Because you critically defaulted on the payments, my excellent credit score was in direct jeopardy. Under the terms of the financial contract, I have the absolute legal authority to voluntarily surrender the asset to mitigate my own financial damages. I called the recovery unit last night and formally removed myself from your mess. That car does not belong to you. It belongs to the bank, and they have come to collect. You cannot do this to me, he yelled, his voice losing all its false bravado and rising in pitch. I will sue you, Charmaine. I will take you to court for intentionally sabotaging my business operations. You cannot afford a lawyer, Jamal, I reminded him brutally. Your credit cards were officially deactivated last night. You do not have the liquid capital to buy a value meal at a fast food drive-thru right now, let alone hire an attorney to fight a losing battle against a perfectly legal asset recovery. You are entirely, completely broke. Through the phone speaker, I heard a loud, heavy clunk, followed by the distinct sound of thick metal chains being pulled taut. Hey, buddy, you cannot take that! Jamal shouted, his voice suddenly moving away from the phone receiver. He was yelling directly at the repo agents. Put the car down right now. That is my property. Step back from the vehicle, sir. A rough, unfamiliar voice barked in the background. We have a legal repossession order verified by the primary account holder. If you interfere with the recovery process, I am calling the local police department and having you arrested for obstruction. Step back onto the grass immediately. Jamal did not say another word to the driver. He knew the police would not care about his fake social media status or his imaginary crypto wealth. They would only care about the legal paperwork which I had flawlessly executed. Charmaine, please. Chloe's voice came rushing back onto the line. She had snatched the phone back from her defeated husband. She was no longer screaming. She was openly weeping, her voice trembling with genuine despair. Please do not let them take it. Everyone is watching. The neighbors are literally taking out their phones and recording us. Please just pay the balance. I will do whatever you want. I will be nicer to you. I will come help take care of Mom. Just make it stop. I closed my eyes for a brief second, picturing the scene. Chloe standing in her expensive silk pajamas crying on the manicured lawn. Jamal standing utterly defeated as the symbol of his fake masculinity was hoisted into the air. The wealthy neighbors whispering and recording the ultimate downfall of the family that had always acted superior to everyone else. It was the exact public humiliation they had so casually tried to inflict on me the night before. You should probably go back inside the house, Chloe, I advised her, my tone completely empty of any sympathy or regret. And you should probably tell Jamal to start looking up the local bus schedules. It is going to be a very long walk to his imaginary investor meetings. Charmaine, wait, Chloe pleaded. Through the phone, I heard the massive diesel engine of the tow truck roar to life. The heavy tires crunched loudly against the pristine concrete of the driveway. The truck shifted into gear, and the distinct sound of the white Porsche Panamera being hauled down the street echoed through the digital connection. The illusion was completely gone. I pressed the red button ending the call and permanently blocked Chloe's number. I placed my phone face down on the desk, took a deep breath of the quiet air-conditioned office air, and opened the first page of the corporate audit. The morning was progressing beautifully, and the absolute best part of the day was still yet to come. For the next 2 hours, I buried myself entirely in the complex financial records of the massive holding company that had just acquired my father's firm. The intricate spreadsheets, the dense liability reports, and the precise digital columns of revenue and debt were profoundly comforting to me. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not attempt to manipulate my emotions or tell me to eat leftover chicken while parading around in tailored suits. They simply stated the objective, undeniable truth. I was deep into a forensic analysis of their quarterly operating expenses when the sleek digital console on my desk began to chime softly. It was my executive assistant buzzing me on the secure internal intercom. Yes, Sarah, I answered, keeping my eyes perfectly locked on the dual monitors in front of me. I am so sorry to interrupt your audit preparation, Charmaine. Sarah said, her voice laced with mild confusion, but I have a Reverend Jenkins on line 1. He bypassed your mobile and called the main corporate switchboard directly. He stated it is a severe family emergency and that he absolutely must speak with you immediately. I stopped typing and pulled my hands away from the keyboard. The heavy, absolute audacity of my mother Brenda was truly something to behold. Having failed to bend me to her will through aggressive screaming, and having watched her youngest daughter fail to manipulate me through fake social media threats, she had now deployed her ultimate weapon. The church. In our community, the church was not just a place of quiet spiritual worship. It was the absolute epicenter of social hierarchy, reputation, and public power. Brenda treated the local congregation like her own personal royal court, and Reverend Jenkins was her heavily compensated king. Put him through, Sarah, I said, leaning back in my heavy leather chair. There was a brief click, and then the deep, booming, theatrical voice of Reverend Jenkins filled my quiet office. Charmaine, my dear sister in Christ. He began, his tone dripping with thick artificial warmth and heavy pastoral authority. I pray this morning finds you in good health and strong spirits. I am at work, Reverend, I replied, my voice completely flat and entirely devoid of the deferential tone he was so clearly expecting. What exactly constitutes a severe family emergency on a Tuesday morning? The Reverend let out a heavy, dramatic sigh directly into the microphone. It was the exact sound he used during his Sunday sermons when he wanted to emphasize the heavy burden of sin. I am calling you from my private pastoral office, Charmaine. Your mother Brenda is sitting right across from my desk. She arrived in tears, completely distraught and broken in spirit. She has shared with me the deep, troubling discord that has suddenly fractured your family home. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a woman weeping aggressively in the background. Brenda was putting on an absolute masterclass in theatrical victimhood. She was performing for an audience of one, ensuring the Reverend saw her as a tragic, heartbroken matriarch, completely victimized by a cruel and rebellious daughter. She told me about this banking situation. Charmaine, Reverend Jenkins continued, his voice dropping into a low, serious register, designed to evoke maximum guilt. She explained how you have suddenly and aggressively cut off your parents' access to their financial resources. She told me about the deep, terrible humiliation your father suffered last night at a very important business dinner. Charmaine, this behavior is deeply unbecoming of a woman raised in the warm embrace of our congregation. They are not their financial resources, Reverend, I corrected him smoothly. They are mine. My mother and father simply had authorized access to my personal credit lines, an access I have now permanently revoked. The Reverend quickly brushed right past the actual logistical truth. He was not interested in the legalities of banking. He was solely interested in maintaining the comfortable status quo of his wealthiest congregants. We are not here to debate the technicalities of worldly finances, he said, smoothly shifting into full preaching mode. We are here to discuss the eternal spiritual laws that govern our lives. The good book tells us in the book of Exodus to honor thy father and thy mother, so that thy days may be long upon the land. It does not say honor them only when it is convenient. It does not say honor them only when you agree with their lifestyle. It is a strict divine command, Charmaine. I listened to him weaponize my faith to protect my abusers. It was a deeply familiar tactic. For decades, Brenda had used scripture as a heavy, blunt instrument to force me into silent submission. Whenever I complained about the blatant unfairness of my childhood, whenever I pointed out the glaring discrepancies in how Chloe was treated versus how I was treated, I was immediately hit with a barrage of cherry-picked Bible verses about obedience and sacrifice. Your parents have sacrificed their entire lives to give you a beautiful home and a strong foundation. Reverend Jenkins lectured, his voice rising with performative passion. Your father, Calvin, is a highly respected pillar of this community. He sits on the church advisory board. He just received a massive corporate promotion that elevates the standing of our entire congregation in the city. To publicly humiliate him in this manner to financially strand your own mother is a deep violation of the family covenant. The Lord requires you to soften your hardened heart, Charmaine. I am personally asking you to pick up your phone, call your banking institution, and restore the peace to your household. Apologize to your mother and fix this terrible misunderstanding today. He finally paused, fully expecting me to crumble under the heavy weight of his pastoral authority. He expected me to weep, apologize, and immediately submit to his divine instruction, just like everyone else in his congregation did. Are you currently sitting at your desk, Reverend? I asked, completely ignoring his lengthy sermon. There was a brief, confused silence on the line. I beg your pardon, he asked. Are you sitting at your desk looking at your computer monitor? I repeated, my tone sharp and relentlessly precise. Yes, I am at my desk, the Reverend replied, clearly thrown off balance by the absolute lack of emotion in my response. But I fail to see what that has to do with your spiritual rebellion. I need your direct email address, I stated, pulling my keyboard back toward me and opening a secure encrypted browser window. Not the general church administration email, your private pastoral inbox. He hesitated, clearly deeply suspicious, but he slowly recited the email address. I typed it into my outgoing message field. Then I quickly navigated to my primary banking portal, the exact same portal I had used to sever the financial veins the night before. I bypassed the main account management tab and clicked directly into the detailed transaction history. I applied a specific search filter, typing the words Mount Zion Fellowship into the merchant search bar. Instantly, a long, highly detailed list of massive financial charges populated my screen. For the past 5 years, Calvin and Brenda had essentially purchased their elite social status at the church using my money. They did not just tithe, they made massive, aggressive donations to secure their positions in the front pews and guarantee VIP treatment at every single church function. They wanted everyone in the congregation to look at them as wealthy, blessed philanthropists. I highlighted the last 5 years of transactions and clicked the button to generate a comprehensive PDF report. Reverend Jenkins, I am currently sending you a heavily encrypted email. I said, my fingers flying across the quiet keys. You are lecturing me about honoring my parents. You are lecturing me about the beautiful sacrifices Calvin and Brenda have supposedly made. I think it is only fair that you understand exactly how those sacrifices were actively funded. I pressed send. I heard the faint digital chime of an incoming message echoing through his phone receiver. Please open the attachment, Reverend. I heard the sound of a computer mouse clicking. There was a pause of about 10 seconds as the heavy PDF file loaded onto his screen. Then the absolute silence that fell over the phone line was so incredibly thick you could have easily cut it with a knife. Even Brenda's performative weeping in the background suddenly stopped dead. She knew exactly what I had just sent him. The document you are looking at is a legally verified statement from American Express. I explained, speaking with the cold clinical detachment of an auditor delivering a final report. You will notice the massive $10,000 donation Calvin publicly made to the Youth Ministry Van Fund last summer. You will notice the $15,000 contribution Brenda proudly presented for the new sanctuary choir robes. You will also see the $25,000 pledge they made to the building expansion project just 3 months ago. The Reverend did not say a single word. I could only hear his faint, shallow breathing. If you look closely at the top right corner of that document, Reverend, you will see the name of the primary account holder. I continued driving the final undeniable nail into the coffin. You will not see Calvin's name. You will not see Brenda's name. You will see my name. Charmaine. Because my father declared total bankruptcy 5 years ago and has lived entirely off my corporate salary ever since. Every single dollar they ever gave to your church, every grand gesture of philanthropy that bought Calvin his seat on your advisory board, was charged directly to my personal credit card. Lord have mercy, the Reverend finally whispered, his deep, booming voice entirely stripped of its theatrical power. My parents are not wealthy pillars of the community, Reverend. I told him, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. They are skilled financial fraudsters who have spent half a decade aggressively bleeding their oldest daughter dry to fund a fake public image. They came to your office today to use you as a collection agent because their personal ATM machine finally decided to lock its doors. But the donations, the Reverend stammered, clearly struggling to process the massive scale of the deception. They stood in front of the entire congregation and testified about how God had blessed Calvin's investments. They lied to your face, I stated flatly. They lied to the church, they lied to their friends, and they have lied to themselves. So please do not call my office ever again to quote the book of Exodus to me. If you truly want to minister to my family today, I highly suggest you open your Bible to the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 15. Thou shalt not steal. You might want to read that one directly to my mother. I did not wait for his response. I reached forward and firmly pressed the red button on my desk console, disconnecting the call. The silence that followed was incredibly beautiful. I had just dismantled the absolute core of my parents' social identity. Without their fake wealth, they had no power in the church, and without the church, they had no public shield to hide behind. The fortress of their fake black excellence was actively burning to the ground, and I was sitting safely miles away watching the smoke rise. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors in front of me, perfectly ready to execute the final stage of my corporate audit. I managed to completely immerse myself in the complex acquisition data for exactly 1 hour and 45 minutes. The quiet hum of the corporate ventilation system and the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard were the only sounds in my private office. I was just finalizing the risk assessment matrix when my personal cell phone sitting face up on the far corner of my desk began to vibrate. It did not just buzz once or twice, it vibrated in a continuous aggressive spasm, sliding a few inches across the polished mahogany surface. I did not need to guess what was happening. I reached over and picked up the device. The lock screen was completely flooded with dozens of rapid-fire notifications, all originating from the massive extended family group chat. The chat was obnoxiously titled The Barnes Family Legacy, and it contained 22 different relatives spread across Connecticut, Georgia, and Illinois. For years, I had kept the chat permanently on mute, only occasionally scrolling through the endless stream of holiday photos, fake inspirational quotes, and thinly veiled bragging. But today the chat was completely exploding, and my name was the sole absolute focus of the digital chaos. I unlocked the screen and scrolled to the very top of the massive wall of text. Brenda had initiated the aggressive smear campaign with a long, highly dramatic paragraph designed to immediately position herself as the heartbroken victim. Her message read, "Please drop to your knees and pray for our family this morning. We believe Charmaine is suffering from a severe catastrophic mental breakdown. She has completely lost her mind and locked us out of all our personal banking accounts. She is actively trying to steal your father's hard-earned money right as he steps into his new vice president role. We are terrified for her mental state and her soul." Immediately below that, Calvin had quickly chimed in to reinforce the massive lie and protect his crumbling ego. He wrote, "I am currently speaking with my corporate attorneys to resolve this illegal financial hack, but we want to handle this privately. We do not want to see Charmaine go to federal prison for wire fraud. She has always been deeply unstable and jealous of our success, but this is a completely new level of sheer psychotic behavior. Please pray for her before she completely destroys herself." The sheer level of calculated manipulation was almost impressive. They knew they had absolutely no financial leverage left, so they were actively attempting to destroy my character before I could expose their fraud. By framing me as a jealous, mentally unstable criminal, they were ensuring that anything I said would be immediately dismissed by the extended family as the ramblings of a crazy person. They were aggressively poisoning the well, and the extended family, true to their toxic enabling nature, took the bait instantly. Aunt Patrice, my mother's older sister who lived in Atlanta and treated church gossip like an Olympic sport, was the very first to respond. "Lord Jesus, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with that girl," Patrice wrote, her digital words dripping with fake religious concern. "She always had that cold, empty look in her eyes at Thanksgiving. She never smiled. She was always so jealous of how beautiful and successful Chloe turned out. Calvin, you need to call the authorities and have her involuntarily committed to a psychiatric ward before she hurts someone." Then Uncle Vernon chimed in. Vernon was Calvin's younger brother, a man who drove a leased BMW he could barely afford and constantly asked the family for short-term loans he never actually repaid. "That is absolutely disgraceful," Vernon typed, adding 3 angry red face emojis. "A black woman trying to tear down a successful black man like her own father. It is an absolute shame. Cut her off completely, Calvin. You do not need that kind of toxic demonic energy around your new corporate promotion." The notifications continued to pour in like a toxic digital waterfall. Cousins I had not spoken to in years were suddenly chiming in, calling me bitter, angry, and deranged. Chloe added fuel to the raging fire by sending a picture of her red, tear-stained face, claiming I was actively trying to ruin her marriage out of pure spite. They were feeding off each other, building a massive collective delusion where they were all innocent victims and I was the undisputed villain. I sat in my quiet office watching the green text bubbles multiply on the screen. My heart rate did not elevate. My hands did not shake. I did not feel the sudden desperate urge to type out a massive defensive paragraph explaining my side of the story. Engaging in a chaotic emotional debate with 22 irrational people was a completely losing battle. They did not care about the truth. They only cared about protecting the comfortable illusion of the Barnes family legacy. I did not need to argue with them. I just needed to show them the math. I opened the secure encrypted cloud drive on my smartphone. This was the digital vault where I kept all the PDF scans of my financial agreements, property deeds, and legal contracts. I had meticulously documented every single financial transaction I had executed for my family over the last 5 years. I knew this day would eventually come, and I was armed to the teeth. I did not type a single solitary word into the group chat. Instead, I selected the first document from my vault. It was a scanned copy of the official federal court document from 5 years ago. The header clearly read United States Bankruptcy Court. Chapter 7. Discharge. Right in the center of the page, printed in bold, undeniable black ink, was Calvin's full legal name and his signature admitting to total absolute financial insolvency. I took a clear, high-resolution screenshot of the document, highlighted the date and the zeroed-out asset columns, and dropped the image directly into the family group chat. I did not wait for their reaction. I immediately went back to my vault and opened the next file. It was the lease agreement for the white Porsche Panamera. I took a screenshot of the signature page, clearly showing my name listed as the primary financial guarantor, and Jamal listed merely as an authorized secondary driver. I followed that image immediately with a screenshot of the official repo order from the auto finance company, which explicitly stated that the vehicle was being recovered due to Jamal bouncing two separate checks and failing to make a payment for 6 months. I dropped both of those images into the chat. Next, I pulled up my own primary banking dashboard. I took a screenshot of my personal checking account, highlighting the automatic monthly transfers paying the minimum balances on 3 different high-interest credit cards. I then took a screenshot of the actual statements for those cards. They were Sephora Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue accounts completely maxed out to their absolute limits and all registered under Chloe's name. I dropped those images into the chat. Finally, I opened the official county property records for the massive Fairfield Colonial House, the house that Calvin constantly bragged about buying with his executive bonuses, the house that Aunt Patrice and Uncle Vernon loved to visit to soak up the fake luxury. I took a screenshot of the official property deed. The document clearly showed that the sprawling estate was entirely owned by a private limited liability company. I then attached the state registry document proving that I was the sole exclusive owner and managing director of that specific LLC. I dropped the final image into the chat. In the span of exactly 60 seconds, I had completely dismantled a 5-year massive web of lies using nothing but 6 indisputable photographic receipts. I set my phone down on my desk and watched the screen. The rapid-fire chaotic scrolling of the group chat stopped instantly. It was as if someone had pulled the main power cord on a massive roaring machine. The constant incoming notifications completely ceased. The screen sat perfectly still, displaying the brutal, undeniable evidence of their collective financial fraud. I could vividly imagine the absolute horror spreading across the country. I pictured Aunt Patrice sitting in her Atlanta living room, her jaw completely unhinged as she realized her wealthy brother was actually a bankrupt fraud, living entirely off his daughter's charity. I pictured Uncle Vernon staring at his phone, suddenly realizing why Calvin had refused to lend him $2,000 last Christmas. I pictured all the loud, opinionated cousins quietly zooming in on the property deed, realizing the massive family estate belonged exclusively to the woman they had just spent the last 20 minutes calling a jealous, psychotic criminal. For 3 long, agonizing minutes, there was nothing but dead digital silence. Then I saw a small gray typing bubble appear at the bottom of the screen next to Aunt Patrice's name. The little indicator danced for a few seconds as she struggled to formulate a response to the devastating truth. Then the typing bubble suddenly vanished. She had deleted whatever she was trying to say. She had absolutely nothing. A moment later, another notification popped up. Uncle Vernon has left the group. He was immediately followed by 2 of my cousins who quietly exited the chat rather than face the sheer massive embarrassment of being proven completely wrong. The fortress of their collective ego was utterly shattered. Calvin, Brenda, Chloe, and Jamal were entirely exposed not just to the corporate world, but to the very extended family they had spent years trying to impress. I picked up the phone one last time. I finally typed a single brief message into the silent chat. If anyone else would like to pray for my financial stability today, please let me know. Otherwise, do not ever contact me again. I hit send. Then I exited the chat, permanently deleted the conversation thread from my phone, and placed the device back on my desk. The smear campaign was officially dead on arrival. The enabling relatives were completely neutralized. I had successfully excised the entire toxic tumor from my life with surgical precision. I turned my chair back to face my dual monitors, cracked my knuckles, and dived right back into the corporate audit. The day was shaping up to be absolutely flawless. I spent the next several hours completely engrossed in my work. The financial data flowing across my dual monitors was highly complex and demanding, but my mind had never felt sharper or more perfectly aligned. Removing the massive psychological weight of my toxic family had immediately unlocked a level of deep clarity I had not experienced in years. I was effortlessly identifying data discrepancies and streamlining the integration protocols for the massive corporate merger. At one point, my executive assistant, Sarah, brought me a fresh salad from the upscale corporate deli, and I ate it quietly at my desk, completely undisturbed by any hysterical phone calls or manufactured family crises. I was finally breathing clean air. By early afternoon, I had successfully compiled the preliminary risk assessment report for the parent company. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, taking a slow moment to stretch my shoulders and enjoy the quiet hum of the office. That was when I noticed a small red notification icon hovering on the home screen of my smartphone. I had permanently blocked Calvin and Brenda, but my cellular carrier had a standard security feature that allowed blocked contacts to still leave voicemails in a hidden separate digital folder. I usually ignored them completely, but today was a day for meticulously tying up all loose ends. I tapped the glass screen and opened the blocked messages folder. There was exactly one new audio file sitting there. It was a 3-minute message from Calvin. I placed the phone in the exact center of my polished mahogany desk and pressed the speaker icon. I wanted his voice to fill the pristine corporate air of my office. I wanted to hear exactly what a desperate narcissistic man sounded like when he realized his primary victim had successfully escaped his financial control. The audio began with the distinct sound of a heavy solid wood door closing, followed by the faint hum of an expensive air conditioning unit. Calvin was clearly calling me from a quiet, private space. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely unrecognizable from the frantic, screaming mess he had been earlier that morning outside the steakhouse. He had miraculously managed to locate his fake alpha male persona again. His tone was icy, calculated, and dripping with supreme arrogant condescension. "Listen to me very carefully, Charmaine." Calvin began, his voice heavily measured and deliberately slow. "I am leaving you this single message to formally inform you that your little financial stunt has ultimately failed. You thought you could completely destroy me today. You thought you could humiliate me and bring me to my knees by cutting off those credit cards. You actually thought I needed your pathetic tech salary to survive in this world. You are so incredibly arrogant and completely out of touch with reality." I reached out and adjusted the volume button, turning it up slightly. I rested my chin on my hands, listening intently as his massive delusion unfolded. "I am currently sitting behind a massive imported mahogany desk in my brand new corner office." Calvin bragged, his voice swelling with manufactured pride and deep vanity. "I am looking out over the entire financial district. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am officially the Vice President of Regional Acquisitions. I have fully arrived, Charmaine. While you are sitting in some tiny windowless cubicle, writing boring computer code for a living, I am commanding a massive division of elite corporate professionals. I do not need your money anymore. I never actually needed your money. I only allowed you to pay for things because it gave your sad, lonely life some small sense of purpose. I was doing you a massive favor by letting you contribute to this family." I actually smiled at that. The sheer psychological gymnastics required to reframe federal bankruptcy and 5 years of aggressive financial fraud as a benevolent favor to his daughter was truly astonishing. He was actively rewriting history to protect his fragile ego. "My new executive compensation package is completely finalized." He continued eagerly, listing off the numbers, as if he were reading a winning lottery ticket to a jealous neighbor. "My base salary is $275,000 a year. Plus, I receive a massive performance bonus structure and a comprehensive executive expense account. But the best part, Charmaine, the part that proves you have completely lost this war, is my signing bonus. On Friday morning, a direct deposit of $75,000 will hit my personal bank account. I will be completely liquid. I will be richer than you could ever possibly imagine." He paused, taking a deep, dramatic breath into the phone receiver to let the heavy numbers sink in. He desperately wanted me to feel a profound sense of regret. He wanted me to realize I had abandoned the family right before they struck absolute gold. "Because of your incredibly disrespectful and psychotic behavior today, you will not see a single solitary dime of this new wealth," Calvin declared, his voice dropping into a harsh, punitive register. "I have already contacted my attorneys to have you formally removed from my will. You are entirely cut off from the Barnes family legacy. You are no longer my daughter. You are a bitter, jealous stranger who tried to sabotage a successful black man's historic rise to corporate power. Brenda is completely devastated, but she agrees with me. We are entirely done with you." I gently tapped my manicured fingernails against the polished wood of my desk. The performance was flawless, but the underlying desperation was glaringly obvious. He was desperately trying to hurt me by taking away something I never wanted in the first place. He was trying to fire someone who had already quit. And to be absolutely clear, Calvin added, his tone dripping with sheer malice, you are strictly banned from the country club inauguration gala tonight. Do not even think about showing your face there to apologize or beg for forgiveness. This is the most exclusive high society event of the entire year. The chief executive officer of the massive parent company is flying in specifically to attend my coronation. The mayor will be there. The regional directors will be there. Jamal and Chloe are already picking up their luxury rental outfits. We are going to celebrate my massive success surrounded by the true elite. Security has your photograph, Charmaine. If you try to step foot on that pristine golf course, they will violently drag you away for trespassing. Have a miserable, lonely life. The voicemail ended with a sharp digital click. The office returned to its beautiful, peaceful silence. I did not feel angry. I did not feel rejected or hurt by his cruel, vindictive words. I only felt a deep, profound sense of poetic justice settling into my bones. Calvin truly believed he had just delivered the ultimate crushing blow. He believed he had successfully secured his wealthy future and permanently locked me out of his exclusive elite world. He believed he was sitting on top of an untouchable corporate mountain looking down at his defeated daughter. But Calvin was fundamentally blinded by his own massive ego and his desperate need for public validation. He had absolutely no idea how the high-level corporate financial world actually operated behind closed doors. He believed his vice president title was fully secured simply because human resources handed him a keycard and showed him to a corner office with a leather chair on his first day. He did not understand that in the ruthless, highly regulated world of corporate acquisitions, executive titles were purely provisional. They were temporary placeholders until the final comprehensive financial audit was completely signed, verified, and legally executed by the acquiring parent company. I moved my smartphone out of the way and reached for the thick physical dossier sitting squarely in the center of my desk. While most of my highly technical work was done on the computer, this specific personnel file required a physical wet ink signature for the legal compliance department. The heavy cardstock folder was stamped with the bright red foil logo of my financial tech firm, the exact same massive parent company that had just aggressively acquired Calvin's mid-sized investment firm. I opened the thick folder. The crisp white title page stared back at me in bold black letters. Executive Restructuring and Personnel Clearance Audit. Subject Calvin Barnes. Proposed title Vice President of Regional Acquisitions. I slowly turned the heavy page. The confidential dossier contained absolutely everything. It had copies of his preliminary employment contract, the specific details of his proposed $275,000 salary, and the vital authorization form for his $75,000 signing bonus. The exact bonus he was just bragging about receiving on Friday. The massive influx of cash that would supposedly save him from his secret financial ruin and fund his new arrogant lifestyle. I skimmed through the dense legal text and the complex background check results until I reached the final page of the document. At the very bottom of the crisp white sheet there was a solid black line intended for the final authorizing signature. Below that line was a printed corporate title, Lead Independent Financial Auditor. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out my heavy silver fountain pen. The cool metal felt perfectly balanced in my hand. I looked at the blank signature line and then looked over at my phone where Calvin's delusional voicemail had just played. He had just spent 3 full minutes bragging about an executive kingdom that did not actually exist yet. He had proudly claimed he did not need me. He had formally disowned me and explicitly banned me from his massive celebration gala. What Calvin completely failed to realize in his endless pursuit of superficial vanity was that the massive parent company did not just buy his firm and blindly hand out executive power. They deployed their own elite internal auditing team to ruthlessly evaluate the personal assets and financial liabilities of the new executive leadership. They deployed a team that specialized in identifying high-risk financial behavior, and I was the absolute head of that auditing team. My quiet, boring tech job, as he loved to dismissively call it, was actually the senior leadership role for the exact corporate empire he was now desperately trying to join. I was the final gatekeeper. My personal signature was the only absolute legal mechanism that could officially release his employment contract, unlock his massive salary, and authorize his signing bonus. His entire professional existence, his financial future, and his precious country club reputation were currently sitting in a paper folder, resting entirely under my physical control. He was throwing a massive, expensive inauguration gala tonight to celebrate a crown he had not actually won, and the person he had just cruelly banned from the party was the exact person holding the keys to the castle. I did not sign the document. I did not reject the clearance either. I simply closed the heavy folder, perfectly aligning the edges of the paper, and placed it carefully inside my leather briefcase. The forensic audit was entirely complete, but the final verdict would not be delivered from the quiet safety of my office. If Calvin wanted to play high-stakes corporate games in front of the elite society he so desperately craved, I was more than happy to oblige him. I checked my gold wristwatch. It was late afternoon. I had plenty of time to go back to my penthouse, change into suitable evening attire, and prepare for a country club gala I was supposedly banned from attending. The evening promised to be truly unforgettable. I left the corporate building as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the towering glass skyscrapers, casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling downtown streets. The drive back to my penthouse was quiet and deeply meditative. There were no tears of rejection blurring my vision today. There was no heavy knot of familial guilt sitting in my stomach demanding that I apologize for existing. The little girl who used to cry in her pale blue bedroom begging for her parents' validation was entirely gone. In her place was a 35-year-old woman armed with irrefutable financial data and a lethal dose of reality. I swiped my key fob, entering the silent sanctuary of my home. The preparation for the absolute social and professional slaughter of my toxic family was finally about to begin. 30 miles away in the affluent suburbs of Fairfield, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Through the extensive network of local high-end rental boutiques that I had occasionally monitored for fraud alerts, I knew exactly how Calvin and Brenda were currently spending their frantic afternoon. With my black card permanently deactivated and their own credit scores hovering in the abysmal low 400s, they could not simply walk into Neiman Marcus and pull a designer gown off the rack. They were forced to endure the absolute indignity of the secondary rental market. I could vividly picture Brenda standing in a cramped, brightly lit discount rental shop, aggressively haggling with a teenage clerk over the deposit fee for a heavily worn sequined dress. She was likely demanding to speak to a manager, invoking her fake status in a desperate bid to waive the security hold she could no longer afford. Calvin, the newly self-proclaimed vice president, was likely sweating profusely through his undershirt as he tried to convince a local tailor to quickly alter a cheap rented tuxedo jacket that was at least 2 sizes too small. They were desperately attempting to glue the shattered pieces of their fake wealth back together, using pocket change and pure unadulterated panic. The sheer exhausting effort required to maintain their massive lie was finally catching up to them in real time. I walked into my expansive master bathroom and turned on the bright vanity lights. I did not rush. I executed my evening routine with the cold, precise calculation of a soldier preparing for battle. I washed my face with premium exfoliating scrub, stripping away the stress of the day. I applied a flawless layer of foundation, contouring my cheekbones to look sharp and completely unforgiving. I swept a deep, smoky charcoal shadow across my eyelids, highlighting the intense focus in my gaze. I finished with a bold, dark crimson lipstick that looked exactly like dried blood. This was not makeup designed to make me look approachable, sweet, or obedient. This was absolute war paint. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and bypassed the standard evening gowns. I was not going to this gala to play the role of a pretty polite guest standing quietly in the background. I was going as the ultimate corporate authority. I reached for the heavy velvet garment bag hanging at the very back of the closet. I unzipped it, revealing a breathtaking bespoke pantsuit that I had commissioned from a master tailor in London. The suit was a deep midnight navy blue, almost black, woven from the finest imported silk and wool blend. The jacket featured sharp structured shoulders and a perfectly nipped waist exuding total dominant control. The trousers were sleek and expertly tailored to seamlessly elongate my frame. It was a $4,000 masterpiece paid for in full by my own relentless hard work and intellectual labor. It was the physical manifestation of my hard-won independence. I slipped into the suit, the luxurious fabric molding perfectly to my body, like a second skin. I paired it with sleek patent leather stilettos that clicked sharply and dangerously against the hardwood floor. I added no flashy jewelry, no diamond tennis bracelets like the ones Chloe wore to fake her status. I only wore a simple, elegant platinum watch on my left wrist to quietly signal to the corporate elite that my time was incredibly valuable. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I did not look like the quiet, boring tech nerd my family loved to mock. I looked like an absolute apex predator ready to hunt. Meanwhile, the chaotic scramble in Fairfield was reaching its pathetic climax. I checked my phone and saw a notification from a shared family calendar app I had intentionally forgotten to delete. Jamal had previously scheduled a luxury town car service for the evening, but knowing his financial accounts were completely frozen and his leased Porsche was currently sitting in an impound lot, he had undoubtedly been forced to cancel the elite chauffeur. Instead, the self-proclaimed cryptocurrency mogul was now likely furiously tapping his cracked phone screen trying to secure a basic Uber Black ride using whatever leftover debit funds he had managed to desperately scrape together. I imagined him pacing nervously in the driveway wearing a rented tuxedo that smelled faintly of dry cleaning chemicals, yelling aggressively at Chloe to hurry up. Chloe, who had threatened to ruin my reputation just a few hours ago, was probably squeezing herself into a last-minute borrowed dress, trying to figure out how she was going to face her elite social circle without arriving in her usual luxury vehicle. They were going to arrive at the exclusive country club in the back of a rideshare, desperately hoping none of the wealthy members saw them stepping out of a car they did not personally own. Their entire existence had been violently reduced to a frantic, stressful hustle just to maintain a deeply fragile visual lie. I turned away from the mirror, completely satisfied with the impenetrable armor I had chosen. I walked back out to the kitchen island and picked up the heavy corporate dossier containing Calvin's entire professional fate. I slid the thick document carefully into a sleek black leather portfolio. This was my invitation to the gala. This was my undisputed VIP pass. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the portfolio and headed for the private elevator. The heavy steel doors slid open, and I descended to the secure underground parking garage. The air was cool and smelled of expensive concrete and luxury tires. I walked past the empty spots to my reliable, understated sedan. I did not need a flashy sports car to loudly announce my arrival. True power did not need to scream for attention. True power arrived quietly, observed the room, and then swiftly rearranged the entire hierarchy without breaking a sweat. I started the engine, the reliable motor humming smoothly to life. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the highway, heading straight toward the exclusive suburban enclave where the country club was located. The sun had fully set now, replacing the bright afternoon light, with a dark, inky sky dotted with faint stars. The highway lights flashed in a steady rhythm as I drove, the beat perfectly matching the calm, confident pounding of my heart. I mentally reviewed the intricate layout of the country club. I knew exactly where the grand ballroom was located, with its massive crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pristine golf course. I knew where the private VIP lounges were situated, hidden away from the main dining floor. I had paid for Calvin's exorbitant membership initiation fees years ago, so I knew the expensive terrain intimately. I knew that right at this very moment, Calvin was likely standing near the imported marble bar holding a glass of top-shelf bourbon he could not actually afford, laughing loudly with men whose financial portfolios he was desperately trying to emulate. He was soaking in the warm admiration of his peers, completely unaware that the ground beneath his expensive rented shoes was actively crumbling into dust. He truly thought the absolute worst thing that could possibly happen today was his credit card being declined at a steakhouse. He had no idea that the real devastating blow was currently cruising down the interstate dressed in midnight blue silk and carrying a legally binding corporate execution order. I exited the highway and turned onto the winding, tree-lined road that led directly to the massive iron gates of the elite club. I rolled down my window slightly, letting the cool night air rush in. The anticipation was electric. The slaughter was fully prepped, and the main event was finally about to begin. I pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Oakmont Country Club and handed my keys to the valet. He briefly paused, looking at my modest sedan, among the sea of Bentleys and high-end Mercedes, but my sharp midnight blue bespoke suit and cold demeanor quickly commanded his absolute respect. He handed me the valet ticket without a single word. I walked up the wide stone steps and entered the grand foyer. The air inside the club was heavy with the scent of old money, expensive cigar smoke, and imported floral arrangements. The architecture was overwhelmingly classic colonial, with massive crystal chandeliers casting a warm golden glow over the polished marble floors. It was a predominantly white, highly exclusive space where generational wealth was fiercely guarded. For a black man to gain entry into this specific inner circle, he either needed to possess undeniable financial power or be exceptionally skilled at faking it. Calvin was currently relying entirely on the latter. I did not immediately enter the main ballroom. I stood near the edge of the grand archway, partially concealed by a massive marble pillar, and simply observed the room. It did not take me long to find him. Calvin was standing near the center of the room, desperately holding court. From a distance, he looked the part of the wealthy, self-made executive. But as I focused my trained eyes on the details, the cracks in the facade were glaringly obvious. The sleeves of his tuxedo jacket were just a fraction of an inch too short, revealing the cheap fabric of his rented shirt. The lapels lacked the heavy, structured drape of a genuine bespoke garment. Next to him, Brenda was wearing a shimmering emerald gown that looked beautiful from afar. But up close, the synthetic material caught the light in a harsh, unnatural way. She was nervously adjusting the neckline, clearly terrified of damaging the heavily used rental dress. Despite their ill-fitting clothes, they were working the room with a manic, desperate energy. Calvin was currently standing face-to-face with Harrison Sterling, the chief executive officer of the massive parent company. Harrison was an older, distinguished white man with silver hair and a deeply relaxed posture that only came from possessing absolute secure wealth. He was holding a glass of scotch and listening to Calvin with mild, polite interest. "Let me tell you, Harrison." Calvin projected his voice, booming slightly louder than necessary to ensure the surrounding guests could hear him. Success in the modern financial sector is all about aggressive forward momentum. You cannot be afraid to leverage your assets to secure the absolute best opportunities. That is the exact philosophy I have used to build my personal wealth, and it is exactly what I plan to bring to the Regional Acquisitions Division. I watched Harrison nod slowly, taking a small sip of his drink. "I appreciate that level of confidence," Calvin Harrison said, his tone smooth and unreadable. "Our auditing board is highly rigorous. We demand absolute financial transparency and impeccable asset management from our senior leadership. We need men who know how to handle significant capital without buckling under the pressure." Calvin let out a loud, booming laugh that sounded entirely hollow. "Well, you are looking at him, Harrison. I have managed a flawless personal portfolio for decades. In fact, I have instilled that exact same financial discipline into my children." Calvin turned and aggressively gestured for Chloe and Jamal to step forward. They had been hovering nervously near the high-top tables, clutching their complimentary champagne flutes like life preservers. They stepped into the small circle, looking completely terrified, but masking it with tight, strained smiles. "Harrison, I want to formally introduce you to my youngest daughter, Chloe, and my son-in-law, Jamal," Calvin announced, beaming with fake pride. Jamal is one of the most brilliant young minds in the digital currency space. He is a highly successful cryptocurrency entrepreneur. He just recently closed a massive round of venture capital funding for his new decentralized trading platform. He is actively building his own empire. I had to clench my jaw to keep from laughing out loud. Jamal, the brilliant cryptocurrency entrepreneur who currently had $0 in his bank account and whose rented white Porsche was likely sitting on a cold concrete slab at the city impound lot. Jamal extended his hand, his palms visibly sweating under the bright ballroom lights. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, Sir Jamal," said his voice lacking its usual aggressive alpha male resonance. Harrison shook Jamal's hand, offering a polite but dismissive smile. "Digital currency is certainly a volatile market, young man. It takes a very steady hand to navigate those aggressive financial swings without losing your shirt." "Oh, Jamal is incredibly steady," Calvin quickly interjected, jumping in to protect the fragile lie. "He drives a beautiful $120,000 Porsche and lives in a gorgeous home. My daughter Chloe is a prominent online lifestyle influencer. They are doing exceptionally well for themselves. We are a family that completely understands the vital importance of projecting success and securing generational wealth." The sheer suffocating tension radiating from my family was palpable even from 30 feet away. They were aggressively smiling and nodding, but their eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. I knew exactly what was happening beneath the surface of this polite high society conversation. They were completely and utterly destitute. Every single credit card in their possession was permanently dead. Their smart home was locked. Their luxury car was gone. They had zero liquid cash to their names. They were standing in this opulent ballroom surrounded by multimillionaires holding their breath and banking their entire physical survival on tomorrow morning. They desperately needed Calvin to pass the final executive clearance. They needed him to be handed that pristine corporate credit card and the massive $75,000 signing bonus so they could immediately pay off the repo men, the rental boutiques, and the furious country club managers. They were looking at Harrison Sterling not just as a corporate boss, but as their absolute financial savior. If Harrison officially blessed Calvin's promotion, the Barnes family facade could continue. If he did not, they would be completely destroyed by sunrise. "I am very pleased to hear that," Calvin Harrison said, checking his expensive watch. "A strong, stable family foundation is exactly what we look for in our executive leadership. Our parent company places a massive premium on integrity. We simply cannot afford any public embarrassments or hidden liabilities in our senior ranks." "Absolutely, Harrison," Calvin agreed, nodding vigorously, his rented tuxedo jacket pulling tightly across his shoulders. "Integrity is the absolute cornerstone of the Barnes family legacy. We have absolutely nothing to hide. My financial records are completely spotless. I am an open book." The breathtaking audacity of his lie was the final signal I needed. Calvin was not just digging his own grave, he was actively jumping into it and pulling the dirt down on top of himself. He was standing in front of the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, aggressively lying about his bankrupt history, his fake wealth, and his imaginary crypto mogul son-in-law. He felt completely untouchable because he firmly believed the only person who knew the devastating truth had been permanently banned from the building. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured, predatory grace of a woman who owned the entire room. The heavy silk of my midnight blue suit caught the light, radiating absolute corporate authority. My patent leather stilettos clicked sharply against the marble floor, cutting through the soft jazz music and the low murmur of the wealthy crowd. As I moved across the ballroom, several people naturally turned to look at me. In a room filled with pastel gowns and traditional black tuxedos, my sharp, dark suit and completely unforgiving expression stood out like a sharpened blade. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the small circle standing near the center of the room. Jamal was the very first one to spot me. He was standing facing the grand archway, and as his eyes tracked my movement, his jaw literally dropped open. All the fake color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and deeply nauseous. He roughly elbowed Chloe in the ribs. She turned around, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she took in my presence. She instinctively took a step backward, nearly knocking over a silver tray of champagne glasses on a nearby table. Calvin and Brenda were facing Harrison, completely oblivious to the approaching threat. Calvin was still enthusiastically talking about his fake stock portfolio when Harrison's gaze suddenly shifted over Calvin's shoulder. The CEO's polite, detached expression instantly transformed into a look of genuine, warm recognition. I stopped exactly 3 feet behind Calvin. I could actually smell the cheap, dry cleaning chemicals radiating from his rented jacket. I stood perfectly still, holding the heavy black leather portfolio in my left hand. The country club facade was completely fully operational, and it was officially time to burn it to the ground. Harrison Sterling smiled warmly, his eyes completely bypassing Calvin's rented tuxedo to focus entirely on me. Charmaine. He called out, his voice cutting sharply through Calvin's endless bragging. I was beginning to wonder if you were going to make it tonight. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung fully open behind me. 4 senior members of the parent company's board of directors stepped through the archway. They were individuals of immense, undeniable power in the financial sector. The chief financial officer, the head of global operations, and 2 senior equity partners. They walked straight toward our small circle, their presence instantly commanding the silent attention of the entire room. As they approached, they naturally formed a protective professional flank around me, nodding in deep respect. Calvin froze mid-sentence. The confident, arrogant smile on his face completely vanished. He slowly turned around, his body stiff and awkward. When he saw me standing there in my $4,000 bespoke midnight blue suit, surrounded by the highest-ranking executives in his industry, his face contorted into a mask of sheer aggressive confusion. He did not see a powerful corporate auditor. His massive ego simply would not allow it. He only saw the daughter he had cruelly discarded that morning crashing his exclusive party to cause a scene. What in the absolute hell are you doing here? Calvin hissed under his breath, leaning in close so Harrison would not hear his vicious tone. His eyes darted nervously around the ballroom. I explicitly told you that you were strictly banned from this event. Security. He actually started to raise his right hand to flag down one of the club guards standing near the entrance. Harrison frowned, looking between Calvin and me with genuine mild confusion. Is there a problem here, Calvin? Harrison asked, his tone dropping its polite warmth. Do you know Miss Barnes? Calvin chuckled nervously, desperately trying to manage the narrative and protect his fragile image in front of the CEO. Ah, yes, Harrison. Unfortunately, this is my estranged daughter, Charmaine. She has a terrible history of causing dramatic scenes, and she clearly followed me here to disrupt this beautiful evening. I sincerely apologize for the unprofessional interruption. I will have the guards escort her out immediately so we can smoothly continue our business discussion. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute and suffocating. The 4 board members standing beside me stared at Calvin as if he had just completely lost his mind. Harrison let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed sharply across the polished marble floor. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of profound disbelief. Escorted out. Harrison repeated the words as if tasting something incredibly bitter. Calvin. That would be a catastrophic mistake for your short-lived career. I do not think you have any earthly idea who is standing in front of you. Harrison stepped forward and gestured respectfully toward me, completely shifting the dynamic of power in the room. Calvin, Brenda, allow me to formally introduce you to the lead independent financial auditor from our global parent company. Charmaine is the senior executive in charge of the entire corporate restructuring process. She personally oversees all high-level acquisitions and mergers. And more importantly for you, Calvin, she is the sole absolute authority conducting the strict financial background checks required for your vice president clearance. The drop was spectacular. It was a flawless verbal execution. I watched the words hit my family like physical blows. It was a magnificent symphony of total psychological destruction played out in agonizing slow motion. Jamal actually swayed on his feet, his knees visibly buckling for a fraction of a second. The fake alpha male cryptocurrency entrepreneur suddenly looked like a terrified little boy. He knew his repossessed Porsche, his bounced checks, and his entirely fraudulent lifestyle were now completely exposed to the highest level of corporate scrutiny. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with absolute horror. The designer clutch she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers and hit the marble floor with a sharp clatter. She stared at me, realizing that the quiet, boring tech sister she had constantly belittled was actually a massive corporate powerhouse who could crush her husband's imaginary empire with a single stroke of a pen. Brenda turned the color of old ash. Her hands flew to her chest, gripping the cheap synthetic fabric of her rented emerald gown. Her jaw opened and closed silently, like a fish suffocating on dry land. The woman who had spent hours in a pastor's office trying to weaponize the Bible to force my submission suddenly realized she was standing in the presence of a God she could not manipulate. Her church titles and her fake community status meant absolutely nothing in this room. But Calvin's reaction was the absolute masterpiece. His eyes darted wildly between Harrison, the board of directors, and my perfectly calm face. He looked at my immaculate suit. He looked at the heavy platinum watch on my wrist. Then his gaze slowly dropped to the thick black leather portfolio I was holding in my left hand. The folder bearing the bright red foil logo of the parent company. In that single devastating moment, Calvin's entire delusional reality violently collapsed. The arrogant voicemail he had left me just a few hours ago played back in his mind. He had proudly claimed he did not need my money. He had bragged about his $275,000 salary. He had gloated about his massive $75,000 signing bonus. He had formally disowned me. And now, standing under the bright crystal chandeliers of the elite country club, he realized that his entire professional existence, his new wealth, and his precious social reputation were currently trapped inside the leather portfolio held by the daughter he had ordered to eat leftovers. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I maintained the absolute cold professionalism of an executioner. I took one deliberate step forward, completely ignoring the terrified presence of Brenda, Chloe, and Jamal. I looked directly into Calvin's wide, panicked eyes and smoothly extended my right hand. It was a cold, formal corporate gesture. A gesture completely devoid of any familial warmth or forgiveness. "Good evening, Calvin," I said, my voice perfectly level and echoing with lethal authority. "It is an absolute pleasure to formally evaluate you." Calvin stared at my extended hand as if it were a highly venomous snake. He was physically paralyzed. His vocal cords completely failed him. He tried to speak to formulate some kind of charming defense, but only a pathetic strangled wheeze escaped his throat. He slowly raised his trembling hand and grasped mine. His palm was freezing cold and drenched in nervous sweat. His grip was entirely incredibly weak. Harrison, entirely oblivious to the deep toxic familial warfare occurring right in front of him, took a sip of his scotch and smiled. "Charmaine is the absolute best in the business," Calvin Harrison stated proudly. "She is ruthless when it comes to identifying financial liabilities. She holds your entire executive compensation package in that black folder. Her signature is the only thing standing between you and your new corner office. I strongly suggest you treat her with the utmost respect." The irony of Harrison's words hung heavily in the air, suffocating Calvin even further. The surrounding wealthy country club members had started to notice the strange, tense dynamic of our circle. People were quietly glancing in our direction, whispering behind their champagne flutes. Calvin's pristine public image was actively bleeding out on the marble floor. He desperately needed that $75,000 signing bonus. Without it, his rented tuxedo would have to be returned. Brenda's fake emerald gown would have to go back to the discount rack. Jamal and Chloe would be completely destitute. They had spent the entire day banking their physical survival on the absolute certainty of Calvin's new corporate wealth. I slowly withdrew my hand from his weak grasp. I looked at the board of directors and offered a polite nod. "Gentlemen, if you will excuse us," I said smoothly, projecting absolute control. "Calvin and I need to review some highly sensitive discrepancies in his personal financial disclosures." "Of course, Charmaine," the chief financial officer replied respectfully. "Take all the time you need. We will be at the private bar with Harrison." Harrison clapped Calvin heavily on the shoulder, nearly causing the terrified man to lose his balance. "Good luck," Calvin Harrison said cheerfully. "Charmaine does not miss a single detail." The executives turned and walked away, leaving me entirely alone with the four people who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. The moment Harrison was out of earshot, the polite corporate atmosphere instantly vanished, replaced by a thick, terrifying silence. Calvin looked around the grand ballroom, his chest heaving with shallow, frantic breaths. He saw the elite society members chatting and laughing, completely unaware that the man standing among them was a bankrupt fraud. He looked back at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered panic. He was entirely trapped. There was no screaming his way out of this. There was no gaslighting or manipulating the numbers. He was staring directly down the barrel of his own absolute ruin. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply against his tight, rented collar. "Charmaine." He choked out, his voice reduced to a pathetic, broken whisper. "Can we please step into the private hallway for a word?" I nodded, once my expression completely blank. "Lead the way, Calvin," I replied. He turned and practically scrambled toward the heavy oak doors leading out of the grand ballroom, his previous confident stride replaced by the frantic shuffling of a terrified man. Brenda, Chloe, and Jamal immediately followed close behind him, moving like condemned prisoners walking toward the gallows. I followed them out, and the heavy doors swinging shut behind us, immediately cutting off the bright ballroom lights and the soft jazz music. The private hallway was dimly lit with crystal sconces and lined with dark mahogany wainscoting. It was entirely deserted. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut, the pristine country club facade completely evaporated. Calvin did not just drop his alpha male persona, he physically collapsed into himself. His shoulders slumped heavily, his chest caved inward, and the arrogant vice president was instantly replaced by a broke, desperate old man. "Charmaine, please," he begged, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his impending ruin. "You cannot do this to me. You cannot deny my clearance. This promotion is my absolute last chance to survive. If I lose this job, I have absolutely nothing left." "You had nothing left 5 years ago, Calvin," I reminded him, my voice cold and echoing slightly in the quiet corridor. "You have been living on borrowed time and my stolen money ever since." Brenda suddenly pushed past Calvin, her rented emerald gown rustling loudly. For the first time in my entire 35 years of existence, my mother was crying genuine, uncalculated tears. Her makeup was actively running down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks across her foundation. She reached out and desperately grabbed my forearm, her perfectly manicured fingers digging into the sleeve of my bespoke suit. "We are so sorry," Charmaine, Brenda sobbed, her voice entirely stripped of its usual demanding authority. "We were completely wrong. I was wrong. I treated you terribly, and I am so incredibly sorry. Please, baby, you have to forgive us. We are your family. We will change. I swear to God, we will change. We will start treating you with the respect you absolutely deserve. Just please do not take this away from your father. If he loses this job, we will lose the house. We will be out on the street." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. "Take your hand off me, Brenda," I commanded quietly. She snatched her hand back as if the silk fabric had burned her, but she continued to weep openly. It was a pathetic sight. She was not crying because she felt genuine remorse for the decades of emotional abuse she had inflicted upon me. She was crying because the ATM machine was officially broken, and the repo man was knocking at her front door. She was mourning the sudden violent death of her luxury lifestyle. I turned my gaze to Chloe. My golden child sister was leaning heavily against the dark mahogany wall, her face buried in her hands. She was physically shaking, her thin frame trembling violently under her cheap borrowed dress. She did not have any arrogant threats left to hurl at me. She did not mention her fake online followers or her brand deals. She knew the reality of her situation. She and Jamal were going to be evicted from their luxury apartment, and they had no marketable skills to fall back on. Jamal stood silently beside her, staring blankly at the intricate pattern of the carpet. The self-proclaimed cryptocurrency mogul looked completely hollowed out, his fake bravado entirely crushed by the massive weight of his financial failure. "Charmaine, I am begging you," as your father Calvin pleaded, stepping forward again. He raised his trembling hands in a gesture of absolute surrender. "I will do whatever you want. I will publicly apologize to you in front of the entire church. I will tell Harrison you were right about everything. Just please sign that paper and authorize my bonus. I need that $75,000 to pay off the immediate debts. Just give me this one final chance to make things right. I promise you will never have to pay for another single thing for this family ever again. I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate pleas wash over me. For my entire life, I had craved their approval. I had worked myself to the bone trying to earn a single scrap of genuine affection from these people. I had paid their bills, bought their clothes, and funded their massive fragile egos, just hoping they would finally look at me and see my worth. But standing here in this dimly lit hallway, watching them weep and beg for my corporate signature, I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no residual guilt, just a cold, pristine clarity. I unzipped the heavy black leather portfolio I was holding and opened it flat against the palm of my left hand. I looked down at the confidential corporate dossier. Calvin, I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly clinical register. Do you know what the primary function of an independent financial auditor actually is? My entire job is to ruthlessly identify systemic vulnerabilities. I evaluate massive corporate entities to ensure they are fundamentally sound before we invest millions of dollars into them. I look for hidden debts, I look for fraudulent reporting, and I look for toxic liabilities that could potentially destroy the parent company from the inside out. I looked up from the folder and locked eyes with him. His face was pale and slick with cold sweat. You stood in that ballroom tonight and lied directly to the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I continued, my words slicing through the air like a scalpel. You claimed your financial records were spotless. You claimed you were a self-made success. But I have the actual receipts, Calvin. I have the Chapter 7 bankruptcy filings. I have the completely maxed out credit cards. I have the repo orders for your son-in-law's rented luxury cars. I have the property deeds proving you do not even own the house you sleep in. But that is all in the past, Calvin stuttered, desperately trying to interrupt me. The new salary will fix all of that. The signing bonus will wipe the slate completely clean. You do not get to wipe the slate clean with my signature. I snapped, shutting him down instantly. You are fundamentally incapable of managing money. You are obsessed with projecting a fake image of wealth to people who do not actually care about you. If I sign this document and grant you vice president clearance, you will have direct, unrestricted access to millions of dollars in corporate acquisition funds. It is only a matter of time before you leverage that corporate money to fund your own personal vanity, just like you leveraged my bank accounts. Charmaine, please, Brenda wailed, burying her face in her hands. I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out the heavy silver fountain pen. I uncapped it, the smooth metal catching the dim light of the crystal sconces. You called me a jealous, miserable stranger this morning, Calvin, I reminded him, quoting his own vicious voicemail back to him. You told me I was completely cut off from the Barnes family legacy. You told me to eat leftovers. You made your absolute choice. Now I am making mine, not as your daughter, but as the lead independent financial auditor of this firm. I held the thick dossier up so he could clearly see the final signature line at the bottom of the page. I pressed the silver nib of the pen against the thick white paper. A man who leeches off his daughter to fake his net worth is a massive toxic liability to this firm. I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. Your financial clearance is permanently denied. With a swift, fluid motion, I drew a thick, bold diagonal line completely crossing out his name and the proposed vice president title. I did not sign my name to authorize his employment. I officially, aggressively voided the entire contract. No, Calvin screamed a raw, guttural sound, tearing from his throat. He lunged forward, reaching blindly for the leather portfolio, but I quickly snapped it shut and stepped smoothly back out of his reach, my expression completely and utterly frozen. He fell to his knees right there on the intricate pattern of the country club carpet. The crisp fabric of his rented tuxedo trousers strained and pulled as he collapsed. He stared at the thick black portfolio in my hand, as if I had just violently severed his lifeline. His breathing came in short, rapid gasps. The magnificent, arrogant empire he had spent 5 years pretending to rule had just been legally dissolved with a single stroke of a silver pen. Chloe let out a sharp, hysterical gasp and slid slowly down the dark mahogany wall until she was sitting on the floor, her designer dress pooling awkwardly around her. She was hyperventilating, her hands clutching her chest. Without that signing bonus, There was no miraculous rescue for her fake online brand. Jamal simply turned his back to us, facing the wall, completely paralyzed by his own impending public ruin. They were all collectively drowning, and the only person holding a life raft had just deliberately set it on fire. "It is done, Calvin," I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy, slipping the silver pen back into my pocket. "The parent company will be formally notifying the Human Resources Department first thing tomorrow morning. Your conditional employment offer is officially and permanently rescinded. You will not receive the vice president title. You will not receive the $275,000 executive salary. And you will absolutely not receive the $75,000 signing bonus. You have exactly nothing." Brenda dropped to her knees beside Calvin, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure terror and disbelief. "How can you do this to us?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "How can you just stand there and watch your own family lose absolutely everything?" I looked down at the two of them kneeling on the floor in their cheap, rented formal wear. "You did this to yourselves, Brenda," I replied coldly. "You chose the illusion over reality. You chose your own massive egos over your daughter. I am simply delivering the final bill for the lifestyle you could never actually afford." The hallway felt incredibly quiet now, broken only by the sound of their pathetic sobbing. For decades, they had demanded my silent obedience, expecting me to quietly absorb their abuse while continually funding their vanity. They had successfully trained me to believe my only value was directly tied to my bank account and my willingness to stay hidden in the shadows. But the shadows were gone now. The bright, harsh light of absolute accountability had finally arrived, exposing every single crack in their perfectly curated facade. They were no longer the untouchable elite. They were simply broken, desperate people facing the brutal consequences of their own actions. I felt a profound, immense weight lift permanently from my shoulders. The heavy, invisible chains of generational guilt were entirely, completely shattered. I turned my back on them. I did not wait for another desperate apology. I did not stay to watch them continue to weep on the floor of the private corridor. I walked slowly and deliberately back toward the heavy oak doors leading to the grand ballroom, leaving the hollow, shattered remains of the Barnes family legacy completely behind me. The heavy oak doors yielded easily to my push, and as I stepped back into the grand ballroom, the warm golden light and the soft, rhythmic melodies of the live jazz band immediately washed over me. It was a jarring but incredibly beautiful contrast to the dark, pathetic scene of weeping adults I had just left behind in the isolated corridor. The elite members of the country club were still laughing, clinking their expensive crystal glasses and celebrating their massive wealth, completely oblivious to the brutal corporate execution that had just taken place mere feet away. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue bespoke suit and walked with absolute calm back toward the private bar where Harrison Sterling and the board of directors were currently relaxing. Harrison looked up as I approached, noticing my solitary return. "Where is our incoming vice president?" he asked, taking a slow sip of his aged scotch. "I hope you did not scare him away too badly, Charmaine." I offered a polite, perfectly measured professional smile. "Calvin experienced a sudden and highly severe family emergency," I lied smoothly, projecting absolute corporate discretion. "He realized that his personal liabilities require his immediate, undivided attention. He has formally decided to withdraw his candidacy for the executive position to focus on his household." Harrison raised an eyebrow, clearly reading the unspoken subtext hidden beneath my highly polished corporate language. He nodded slowly, setting his crystal glass down on the marble bar. "I see," Harrison said, his voice dropping its cheerful tone. "Well, it is incredibly fortunate that we caught these personal liabilities before the final contracts were legally executed. I appreciate your ruthless diligence, Charmaine. You just saved this parent company a massive potential headache." I spent the next hour casually mingling with the highest-ranking executives in my industry, discussing complex financial algorithms and global market trends. I did not look back at the heavy oak doors. I did not care how Calvin and Brenda managed to sneak out of the elite club in their cheap rented formal wear. I was entirely focused on cementing my own unassailable reputation among the true power players. When I finally left the country club later that night, the crisp, cool air felt like pure absolute victory filling my lungs. The rapid, brutal aftermath of that night unfolded with the terrifying speed and precision of a falling guillotine. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, the Human Resources Department of the parent company formally emailed Calvin. The message was legally brief and completely devoid of emotion. It formally notified him that his conditional offer for the Vice President of Regional Acquisitions was permanently rescinded due to critical failures in his executive background clearance. He was instructed to immediately return his temporary security badge and was strictly forbidden from stepping foot on the corporate campus. There was no severance package. There was no $75,000 signing bonus. There was only the harsh, undeniable reality of sudden unemployment. By noon that same day, I contacted my retained real estate attorney. I instructed him to draft and legally serve a formal 30-day notice to vacate to the current residents of the massive Fairfield Colonial Estate. Brenda frantically attempted to call the local police department to report an illegal eviction, screaming to the dispatchers that her own daughter was throwing her out onto the street. But when the responding officers arrived and reviewed the Ironclad LLC ownership documents I had provided to my attorney, they quickly informed my mother that she was legally nothing more than a month-to-month tenant whose lease had just been formally terminated. The social and financial freefall of my parents was spectacular to witness. Without my black credit card to fund their massive vanity, and without the sprawling Fairfield estate to anchor their fake community status, they were violently expelled from their elite social circles. The country club permanently revoked Calvin's membership due to highly delinquent monthly dues. Reverend Jenkins, having seen the undeniable proof of their financial fraud, quietly but efficiently ostracized them from the church hierarchy. They were no longer allowed to sit in the VIP pews, and their names were completely scrubbed from the church advisory board. With absolutely zero liquid capital and credit scores hovering in the deep abyss, they could not secure a lease in any respectable neighborhood. They were ultimately forced to aggressively downsize, moving into a cramped, dimly lit two-bedroom apartment located right next to a noisy, elevated highway on the far outskirts of the city. The beautiful imported Persian rugs and the massive crystal chandeliers were entirely gone, replaced by cheap peeling linoleum floors and flickering fluorescent hallway lights. Calvin was forced to take a mid-level accounting job at a strip mall tax preparation office just to pay for their basic groceries. His days of wearing custom-tailored suits and aggressively bragging about his massive stock portfolios were completely over. But the most poetic justice of all belonged to my sister Chloe and her fake alpha male husband. The very morning after the country club disaster, the massive luxury apartment complex where they lived officially flagged their account for severe non-payment. With the credit cards permanently locked and the repo men having already dragged the white Porsche away, Jamal realized his endless free ride was officially dead. The silent, bottomless ATM machine he had ruthlessly mocked had permanently shut its doors. Jamal did not stay to comfort his weeping wife. He did not step up to provide for the family like the wealthy cryptocurrency entrepreneur he relentlessly claimed to be. The moment the money completely dried up, Jamal packed his fake designer luggage called a cheap rideshare service and completely abandoned Chloe. He left her sitting alone in an empty luxury apartment, surrounded by unpaid Sephora bills and the shattered remains of her fake online empire. Chloe attempted to desperately spin the narrative on her social media platforms, crying on camera about a toxic, sudden divorce to gain sympathy from her followers. But the internet is incredibly ruthless and highly observant. Her followers quickly noticed the missing luxury car, the sudden lack of expensive shopping hauls, and the cheap background of the tiny studio apartment she was eventually forced to rent. Her brand deals completely evaporated overnight. The golden child who had spent her entire life mocking my work ethic was ultimately forced to accept a minimum wage retail job, standing on her feet for 9 hours a day, folding the exact same designer clothes she used to arrogantly purchase with my hard-earned money. Months passed and the deep, chaotic noise of my toxic family completely faded into absolute silence. I sit here now on the expansive private terrace of my downtown penthouse, holding a warm ceramic mug of artisanal coffee. The morning sun rises over the glittering city skyline, casting a beautiful golden light across the Brazilian hardwood floors. My smartphone sits on the glass table completely silent. There are no frantic, hysterical voicemails demanding that I fix a financial disaster. There are no toxic group chats aggressively attacking my character. There is only the deep, profound, beautiful sound of my own absolute peace. Going through this brutal, massive transformation forced me to entirely redefine the fundamental concept of family. For 35 years, I was heavily brainwashed to believe that family was strictly defined by shared bloodlines and legal birth certificates. I was taught that you must blindly endure psychological abuse, financial exploitation, and constant emotional manipulation simply because the people hurting you happen to share your genetic code. But I know the absolute truth now. Family is not an unconditional blood contract that legally authorizes someone to continuously destroy your mental health. True family is built entirely on a foundation of mutual respect, genuine support, and the strict honoring of personal boundaries. Family are the people who actively celebrate your massive successes without secretly plotting how to financially exploit them. Family are the people who invite you to the dinner table because they genuinely value your presence, not because they simply need you to quietly pay the expensive restaurant bill while they eat the prime cuts and leave you with the scraps. I successfully used the massive corporate power I built with my own two hands to absolutely crush the toxic entitlement of the people who tried to keep me small. I cut the heavy, rotting branches off my family tree, and in doing so, I finally allowed myself the vital sunlight I needed to properly grow. The wounds they inflicted upon me throughout my childhood are finally completely healing, leaving behind nothing but thick, impenetrable armor. I am no longer the quiet, boring tech sister hiding in the background. I am the absolute architect of my own incredibly beautiful reality. Have you ever had to use your success to crush the entitlement of a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments. Like and subscribe to hear more authentic stories of resilience and growth. And remember, if they treat you like an ATM machine, you have the absolute power to permanently cancel their access.